listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Murder most foul in London, followed by mayhem in London, in Clapham Common, and right now in the centre of London in Parliament Square. There has been an uprising of protest about the growing and vicious amounts of violence against women from men in London and, of course, throughout the country. I don't suppose it's much different where you are. But have these protests been entirely genuine? Have they done any good? And who is responsible for violence against women? And has there been a rise in violence against women? That's a question we'll be deep diving into in the course of the mother of all talk shows this evening. And there's mayhem, no murder yet, in the royal family over the Oprah Winfrey special, which has got them all hot under the collar over on this side of the pond and appears to have fueled presidential ambitions in Meghan Markle. According to today's Daily Mirror, Markle intends to run for president in 2024. Well, if Donald Trump can do it, why not someone with Prince Harry at her side and all her qualities as an actress? And talking of actors, we'll be taking a deep dive into deep fake VFX. I've never seen anything like it. Turns out, with artificial intelligence, you can make Tom Cruise say anything that you want to. It's all coming up over the next 3 hours. It is the mother of all talk shows. Don't miss it.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com. You can listen to us in crystal clarity on FM, but only in the Washington, D.C. era, on 105.5. Donald Trump used to be a regular listener. Joe Biden doesn't know it's Sunday, so he doesn't know that the show is on. You can listen on AM right across the United States, from Burning City to Burning City. Listen all over the world, thanks to the aforementioned SputnikNews.com. But 500,000 of you and more every single week are watching as well as listening to the show. And if you are watching on my Facebook page, then please share it with all of your contacts. I'll have something to say about Facebook in just a minute. You can watch on my Facebook page or on RT's multiple Facebook pages, on my YouTube channel, do subscribe, or on RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Twitter, as an ever larger number of you are. Last week, another record audience watching on their telephones on Twitter. You can watch on Twitch, and of course you can watch on my Telegram channel, the name of which continues to escape me, but my friends will help me on the screen in a minute. We're running, it's t.me/George Galloway. There it is, t.me/George Galloway. How could I forget it? The Telegram, of course, is now the fastest growing portal and platform in the world. It has 700 million users, and we intend to get a share of that market. And who knows, we may end up only on the Telegram channel. Because as some of you will already know, we were taken off Facebook last week in the wake of an entirely baseless, bogus copyright claim by the French state broadcaster TF2. Now, a lot of people blame Facebook for automatically believing TF2 when they said that an interview between me, live, and the Right Honourable Norman Baker, a member of Her Majesty's Privy Council, could possibly have been owned by them. There were no photographs, no footage, nothing that could be copyrighted, but TF2 thought that it belonged to them. Now, they haven't bought me. I don't think they've bought the Right Honourable Norman Baker. A conversation about the British royal family between two former members of the British family on of the royal family on a platform called RT has clearly nothing to do with France 2. And that will be shown in court if necessary, but I fully expect them to settle our claim, which is a substantial one, for the damages, financial damages that we incurred by their false claim of copyright. Whether Facebook should have so immediately accepted the validity of this false claim and take us off the air is, of course, as well disturbing. But me, I blame the French, and we're coming to get them. We will take action, if necessary, in the French courts to get the damages that we deserve. And it's a bit of an international incident, really. Two British parliamentarians speaking about the royal family in Britain in a live interview on RT, and in come the French, kicking the door in. More of that later. There have been terrible scenes in London. Last night in Clapham Common, a place I used to live in, actually for many years. I used to live there. I know all of the streets around there. And there was a vigil called in memory of a young woman, Sarah Everard, aged 33, who was cruelly murdered, viciously murdered. Her body found decomposing in a set of woods in Kent. Her family devastated, broken-hearted. This young woman's life snuffed out. The police acted remarkably quickly and well. They tracked down the alleged murderer in double quick time, actually, in terms of a murder inquiry. They were helped by CCTV camera on buses and on people's doorbells. And they traced the car, followed the car on the CCTV down the highways and found, no doubt to their devastation, that the car appears to belong to a serving police officer, not just a police officer, but a police officer entitled to be armed and in the Westminster Parliament and diplomatic police service. That means he was not just an ordinary copper. He was a copper with a gun. He was a copper guarding diplomatic and government and parliamentary potential targets. And allegedly, he has murdered this poor girl. It doesn't get much worse than that. And the Metropolitan Police will have been devastated by it. As I say, they made an arrest, two arrests, very quickly, and one man has been charged with murder and with an earlier indecent assault charge. And a woman in her 30s, some people say his wife, has been arrested and charged with protecting an offender. We have to be very careful because this is now a live legal matter. Charges have been laid, and this man is an alleged murderer, and the woman is an alleged harbourer of an offender. But the murder of this young woman, which of course sadly was not unique, women are murdered by men in this country and in other countries, in truly alarming numbers. But for some reason, we could speculate as to why this particular murder has been the straw that broke the camel's back. And a series of absolutely justifiable cries of anguish and anger have arisen from women all over the country, all over the world, in fact, about the murder of this young woman. There are many other murders, many other cruel murders of men, many other cruel murders of children, many other cruel murders of women, but this one seems to have captured the public imagination. A vigil was called in Clapham Common, and to her very great credit, the future Queen of Britain attended it. And without a mask, I may say. She attended it before the trouble started, so I suppose the police can be relieved that no officer grabbed the Duchess and wrestled her to the ground, manhandling her and causing, if it had happened, the immediate resignation of the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, of the Mayor of London, and of the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. But as she was not the woman that was wrestled to the ground, manhandled, and treated somewhat brutally by the police that moved in to break up the vigil, none of these resignations has been forthcoming. But I'm one of these that believes that all three of them should resign, and I'll tell you why. Any sensible person, let alone one paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to command the Metropolitan Police, would have seen the shocking elephant trap that police manhandling women with candles, mourning the murder of a woman allegedly at the hands of a Metropolitan Police officer. Any sensible person would have seen that this was such an elephant trap that the police would have kept their distance and not intervened. After all, it was in the middle of a park. It wasn't in central London. There were no public buildings that could have been damaged or attacked by anyone at this vigil, which turned into an angry protest. And therefore, Cressida Dick showed herself again last evening as too stupid to be the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. But she's also too wicked to be the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and as a veteran of the campaign for justice, for Jean-Charles de Menezes, a Brazilian electrician who was shot dead by the police, 5 bullets at point-blank range into his brain on the floor of a London Underground train because Cressida Dick thought he was a member of an Al-Qaeda cell about to blow up London. After which she was promoted, not demoted, promoted to become the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. Now, here I'm going to tell you some home truths. Some of you won't like them. The idea that Cressida Dick is the best qualified police officer to lead the Metropolitan Police is so absurd that if you believe it, I have a bridge here in London that I can sell you. Cressida Dick was appointed as the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police not because of her abilities as a police officer, which had already been abundantly seen to be absolutely woefully inadequate. She was appointed because she was a gay woman, and those that make that appointment were determined to send a virtue signalling message to the population that London's police were led by a lesbian, led by a woman. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not remotely interested in the sex life or the gender of London's police commissioner. I'm only interested in how good they are at doing the job. Now, anybody sensible would have seen that the kind of scenes we saw last night would be potentially, in public relations terms and in relations with the public terms, disastrous, and they would have policed it entirely differently. But to be fair to Cressida Dick, she has a mayor in charge of the Metropolitan Police who's even more stupid than she is, and who also represents a failed experiment in identity politics and political correctness. Why do I say that? Well, I've been saying it for 6 years. The idea that Sadiq Khan was the best that Labour could put up to be mayor of London is equally absurd as the idea that Cressida Dick was our top and best copper. Sadiq Khan got the Labour nomination for only 2 reasons. One was the colour of his skin, and the other was his faith. It was a virtue signalling experiment. Let's show the world that we have a man of Pakistani Muslim heritage, and we've put him up to be mayor of London. I told you at the time 5 years ago that he would be the worst ever London mayor, and my goodness, has he abundantly proved me right. London is now in many parts virtually ungovernable. So much so that after 35 years in London, I've had to move my family out of it. London is in many places a cesspit of stabbings and murders and drug gangs and postcode gangs, murdering and maiming each other almost at will. And London's police force is 20,000 officers short. So I'm not attacking the poor coppers doing their best to fill the streets as well as they can with reassuring police presences. I'm blaming the political leaders of London who have allowed this situation to continue. Now, if I had been the mayor of London, and I tried to be, I got 154,000 votes, but Sadiq Khan got well over 1 million votes. I would have been banging the door down in Downing Street until those police cuts had been restored. But Sadiq Khan doesn't do banging the door down. He couldn't reach the letterbox in 10 Downing Street. One of the characteristics of both of these individuals that they are both scarcely 5 foot tall. And that's literally true as well as metaphorically true. But the person responsible for the funding of the Metropolitan Police is Priti Patel. Priti Patel is also an exercise in political correctness and identity politics. Because if she's the best person to be the Home Secretary of Britain, then I'm a Dutchman. And I've got a bridge here. And another one in Amsterdam to sell you. All 3 of them are responsible for the disastrous situation that currently obtains in London. And if I get updates from my friends about what's happening in central London, well, thousands of coppers are gathering because thousands of people are protesting. Now, a word about the protesters. I'm duty-bound to make this point. If I had turned up on Clapham Common last night, I would have been as popular as a pork chop at a Muslim wedding. The vigil was infiltrated and hijacked by some of the most extreme groups and individuals currently operating in this country. You only have to look at the videos to see. F the police, they were. Who chants F the police at a vigil for a murdered woman? Who chants defund the police at a vigil for a murdered woman? These rancid extremists who've targeted me in the past are not the point. They would have just been shouting into fresh air on Clapham Common if the police had not intervened, and the whole matter would have passed without the consequences that it will now have. We've got a poll going. Who is to blame for the rise in violence against women? A, the government. B, the police. C, men. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. Get busy. You can call us from the UK on 02077 982 255 or from the US on 001 757 744 4480. And you can tweet us at George Galloway, at RTUK News. Do include both of us. I'll be back on the Meghan and Harry on Opera with Patrick Christys right after this 1 minute break.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've got a
ahead.
book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. 02077 982 255 is the number if you're in the UK, or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or tweet me, of course.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, here's a real transatlantic story. Prince Harry and his American actress bride, Meghan Markle. I think that's what we call them now. I'm not even sure if Harry's still a prince, but if I have the nomenclature wrong, please forgive me. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle go to Hollywood. No, it's not a TV series or a movie, it's real life. They now live near Hollywood, in southern, sunny California, in any case. They are so desperate to stay out of the public eye that they sign a Netflix deal worth $100 million, and they arrange for a big, long sit-down with another queen. The Queen of Sofa Television, Oprah Winfrey. What happened next? Well, who better to tell us than our good old friend Patrick Christys, journalist, commentator, and broadcaster extraordinaire. Patrick, very nice to see you again on the mother of all talk shows. You were looking so fetching in that bow tie in the picture I was circulating. I thought you were going to be the new Robin Day. Anyway, what happened next, Patrick?
Well, Meghan and Harry told their truths, didn't they? Which is what Oprah used as the phrase to say what they were saying. It was their version of events that led up to their decision to essentially leave the royal family and everything that happened. In between, there were several main hooks to this particular interview. There was a big part on mental health, Meghan's mental health, and how damaging her membership of the royal family was. There was also the notion put forward that the royal family essentially had either been deliberately putting out negative press around Meghan, or certainly not doing anything to stop it once it was out there, It was also, of course, the key racism allegation, essentially, which is that Meghan said that Harry had told her anyway, like a dutiful husband, that there had been some conversations over the skin tone of their future child, Archie, which was, of course, when Meghan was pregnant. And to quote Meghan, what that would mean. The end result of this now is that there was days of speculation as to exactly which member of the royal family is a frothing racist, and they're all going to have to deny it until they're blue in the face from now on. Harry's revelations were quite potent as well. It wasn't all Meghan. Harry said that Prince William and indeed Prince Charles are trapped in the royal family, and that the royal family only exists as long as the perception of it as a do-good organisation exists. So really some quite fruity stuff there.
Well, their truths didn't entirely match, Patrick. No. Harry said the conversation about what colour the children would be took place before the wedding, not before not whilst Meghan was pregnant. I'll tell you why I bring that up.
Yeah.
I am the father of 5 mixed-race children, and I'm willing to bet that my relatives wondered what the children would look like. It is not actually a frothing at the mouth piece of racism to ask, what will your children look like? Unless you were asking it with some kind of horror that they may look one way or the other. And when the conversation took place is actually a rather important point also, is it not?
Yeah, well, look, 100%. And it doesn't surprise me that their recollections vary. I mean, their recollections about when exactly they got married managed to vary, didn't it? Meghan saying that they got married 3 days before. Turns out not only is that actually illegal in the Church of England, it also didn't really happen, did it? So, yeah, if they can't get that straight, I think they're rivaled in their amnesia by only Nicola Sturgeon at the moment. So they're doing quite well when it comes to that. But the major issues that centred for me anyway around that allegation of racism about the royal family is that my understanding is that around 70% of the Commonwealth is non-white. Therefore, clearly, if there's a damaging racial accusation being levelled at the royal family, that could have catastrophic consequences around the world. I think already in America, of course, not a Commonwealth nation, but already in America, I think the damage has been done quite badly over there. I think in this country we've made relatively resolute in our defence of the royal family for the most part, I think. But around the world there is damage done. When you lob an accusation out there like that could essentially apply to a number of people, if I'd put that accusation in an opinion column, say in a newspaper about some of my relatives, I would expect to get a letter in the post from them, quite possibly telling me that I've got a case that I better be preparing for, because I need to actually prove the accusation and not tarnish them all with the same big racist brush. And this appears to have happened now. And so for 12 hours, a full 12 hours, we had this speculation really centering around whether or not it was Prince Philip who'd said something racist. Then it emerges that Harry had told Oprah off camera that it definitely wasn't Prince Philip or the Queen. Well, why didn't he say that himself on air then? Because actually what I deliberately created was a situation worldwide for at least 12 hours where essentially everyone thought that Philip might have said something a bit rum. So look, there's a lot of that going on. And I think as well, it's just the overt damage I think that this could do to the United Kingdom, to the monarchy anyway, around the world. I just wonder whether or not Harry quite realises what he's doing.
I thought that during the interview. It's difficult to avoid sounding sexist about this, but I feel that she wears the trousers in that relationship. Do you?
I think she definitely wears the trousers. She buys the trousers and she decides what trousers he has to wear as well, possibly. Now, look, we don't know, of course, but that was the impression that I got. I tell you what did come across for me, and shone through actually, is what an articulate lady, and clearly a very intelligent lady, Meghan Markle actually is. Whether or not I agree with anything that comes out of her mouth is a different thing. She has clearly got brains to burn, and actually, look, I really don't mean to sound this in a derogatory way whatsoever. I thought there was a contrast really when Harry rocks up and started speaking. I think that highlighted that for me more than I've ever seen that highlighted before. So I learned something at least from this Oprah interview. What I will say,
she's the clever one in the partnership.
It did make me laugh, when he was saying, we didn't know what to do when Daddy cut me off. So obviously Prince Charles cut him off. Harry is a 36-year-old man, by the way, who then had Mummy's Trust Fund to fall back on, a Rolodex of some of the world's most famous and influential people at his beck and call, and people who are even willing to pay just absolutely for free for him to go and live in their 20-odd million pound mansion with full security. So it wasn't hardship, was it, really, for Prince Harry? And I think he kind of missed the boat a little bit there as well with that one. So there was a lot to come out of this, none of which I think paints the royal family in a particularly good light. Harry's statements as well about the fact that, and I thought this didn't get quite enough attention, he basically came out, which for a member of the royal family, whether or not he wants to divorce himself from it is another thing, but to actually come out to an audience of potentially 100 million people, or how many people watch this, and officially say, realistically, the royal family can only exist as long as the perception exists that it is an inherently good thing, saying that it is basically at the mercy, isn't it? If the press turned against it and public opinion turned against it, then the monarchy would cease to exist. For someone who's been born and raised in the monarchy to come out and actually say that on international television, I thought was pretty extreme. And I just think, if I was the Queen, I'd be very, very upset, I would imagine.
Now, on the subject of who gained from it, I read in the Mirror today that Meghan wants to run for President of the United States. Now, that would have seemed an absurd and ridiculous idea before Donald Trump did it from the chair of The Apprentice. Actually, Meghan has, if anything, more of a platform than Donald Trump had when he began his run for president. So I'm not ruling that out, actually. What do you hear about what her political ambitions might be and what her politics might be?
Well, it's absolutely no secret, is it, that Meghan is clearly a fiercely driven woman with a lot of ambition. I think for a lot of people, they wondered where exactly that ambition lay. I think what's emerged, and looking in my honestly held opinion anyway, is that I think the ambition really was, she was never an A-list actress, was she, in Hollywood? She no doubt would not. Well, she didn't really get any of the top roles. She was in Suits, and that was fantastic. Well done, Meghan. But, she wasn't on the silver screen every single week with some of the world's greatest actors and actresses. And I think she possibly had a bit of a chip on her shoulder about that. And now she's re-entered Hollywood as number one, hasn't she? She is the show in town. She's the big, big, big star, And so I think that was initially her ambition. I think clearly they will have a bit of a chip on their shoulder over the idea now that they've been accused or it's been hinted anyway from the royal family, that Harry and Meghan didn't share the royal family standards of service and what service meant. And Meghan and Harry hit back by saying service is universal. I suspect that one thing that she's going to do is enter politics, is try and go right in at the top. Let's just completely ignore what maybe qualifies her opinions to be better than anybody else's on any of these issues. The fact is, it's nice to see her protecting her right to a quiet life by potentially running for president. But also, if you think about it, she's become a media darling, especially in the United States. And what she did cleverly in this interview was wrap herself in the blanket of mental health issues and wrap herself in the blanket as well of some racism allegations. And what that does is it basically means that you are now untouchable. You cannot criticize Meghan because she could have had mental health issues, or it could be perceived as racist. Even if I definitely don't mean it to be racist, George, perhaps my subconscious means it to be racist, and therefore I'm a shocking person and need to be cancelled.
And you'll have to go for retraining.
Yes.
The situation is that she is an American citizen. He is not, but then he doesn't have to be. It would be rather a reversal of the American Revolution, wouldn't it? They rose up to get rid of King George, only to have as their first spouse living in the White House that the Redcoats burned down. A member of the British royal family. How's that for piquant?
Oh, and can you imagine that the state visits, they would have a new awkward twist to them, wouldn't they, as Prince Harry, First Lady of the United States, arrives to meet the Queen. I think that would be interesting. Look, it would certainly be a bit different. But look, as you've rightly said, Donald Trump changed the game when it came to everything that we thought we knew about politics, frankly, and how to get elected. And so they've got every possible possibility of getting there. They would, of course, have all the support of the Obamas and those usual candidates there as well, so they can just wheel them out at any particular opportunity. And it just remains to be seen as to exactly when when they want to do it. But yeah, I think they're well placed to try and do that if they want. The question that I would say is, though, I think maybe Meghan's politics and just hinting at what some of the issues you imagine that she might be banging in favour of, the environment and all of that. I mean, I would imagine she'd be relatively woke, isn't it? That's kind of the point of her. I do understand that might go down relatively well in America. Perhaps the ground is slightly more fertile there. Certainly not in vast swathes of America, don't get me wrong. But in parts of it, yes. It certainly wouldn't over here. And I think that, the idea of standing for election, I would like to see her do it, actually, because if she does stand for election and she gets elected, eventually she'll have to start practicing what she preaches, and she'll have to actually put some things in motion. It's very easy, isn't it, I think, to marry a royal and go to various charitable events and just say things like, we're in solidarity with you. It's another thing to actually affect change in the world. And look, with the best will in the world, I know she's an actress and she's clearly a very intelligent woman. You can't really just pretend and play at being the leader of the free world.
It's a lot of avocado on the toast, no doubt about that. Patrick Christys, I knew you would take us through this with such dash and elan, even without your lovely bow tie. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Let's take some calls on this. DJ in Oregon on the royal family and republicanism. Go ahead, DJ.
Well, good evening, Mr. Galloway. Pleasure to talk to you, or get a chance to talk to you again. This is something, actually, we talked about in class yesterday, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. Because if I remember my reading correctly, and I'm sure you could correct me, sir, Michael Foot, one of the early leaders of the Labour Party in the 80s, was a Republican, and Jeremy Corbyn, if I remember correctly, because of his appointment to the Privy Council, was questioned because of his republicanism. And I wanted to ask you, sir, because of certain politicians with their views about abolishing the monarchy, do you think that the Sussex's interview was proverbial fuel on the fire for this idea? Because we tossed this idea around in my class on foreign relations for about a good hour and a half yesterday, and we came to a stalemate. So I'm wondering...
Well, I think that in Britain, it has consolidated support for the monarchy. I think by 2-1, the opinion polling suggests that people side with the Queen, with the royal family, and against Harry and Meghan. And I think in the days since, that number probably has grown still further. So it has not brought republicanism closer in Britain, but rather forced it further away. The great majority of people in Britain would rather keep the monarchy for a whole variety of reasons, some of them crass, like, tourist earnings and so on, even though, of course, the palaces would be as wonderful or not if the Queen was living in them or not. It doesn't make any difference to the aesthetics of the royal artifacts and so on. But there's a couple of main reasons why the great majority of British people support monarchy. One is the extraordinary life of the Queen herself. The Queen has been fairly universally regarded as a good thing, as a devoted public servant for as long as I've been alive, and even longer than that. And so most people like the Queen. Whether they'll like King Charles as much is a very debatable point. I've said many times, if the monarchy want to really consolidate their situation, they should pass Charles over and give the job immediately to Prince William on the death of the monarch. Because Prince William is really rather popular, as is his wife, the Duchess, who appeared at the vigil that I talked of earlier in the show. So whilst this has been immensely damaging to Britain, overseas, in America, in the Commonwealth, inside Britain, I should have said that it has strengthened the monarchy rather than weakened it. So thanks for that call, DJ. Tell your classmates that's what I say Rory is in Montrose, and we better hear him.
Hi, George. I'm from Montrose, Angus. I'll be voting in this year's general election for the first time ever. And I'd like to ask you, if you had the opportunity to speak to a crowd of, well, young voters, let's say they were still in high school or an academy, would you maybe tell them, for example, why their vote matters so much? Because, you know, obviously people my age don't vote as often as, well, they just don't vote often.
What age are you, Rory?
I am 17.
Okay. So in Scotland, you can vote at 16. That's the first thing to explain. In the rest of the UK, it's 18. I would say that if you don't vote, you're leaving the question of who governs you to everyone else. If you don't vote, you have no right to criticise the actions of government because you deliberately decided not to affect the outcome of that election by not voting. Everyone must vote. Everyone should vote. In places like Australia, you're legally obliged to vote, albeit you can vote for none of the above. You can effectively spoil your paper, but you do have to fill in your ballot paper. But Scotland is in such a state, Rory. It's in the governing party is in such a state of disarray and disgrace that I'll be surprised if people don't vote. And actually, I'll be surprised if they don't vote the current government out. Last word to you, son.
Thanks a lot. That's very... Thanks a lot, George. That's quite
okay.
good answer.
I know Montrose very well, by the way. I played a trial up there once as a centre forward, but I was too small. But just not as small as Cressida Dick and Sadiq Khan. I'll be right back after a 60-second break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, Norman Brennan is a former Metropolitan Police officer, detective, and a very fine commentator on policing matters, crime matters. And in the light of what's happening right now in central London, what happened in Clapham Common last night, and what happened in the cruel murder of Sarah Everard, we've asked Norman to join us on the show, and I'm grateful that he has agreed to do so. Norman, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. Obviously, we are circumscribed in what we can say now about the live case, but it must have come as an enormous shock to the Metropolitan Police that the alleged murderer, only an allegation at this stage, not proven, he's innocent until proven guilty, but the man they've charged with the murder is a serving Metropolitan Police officer. That doesn't get more bizarre than that, does it?
Well, I've got to say, George, that every murder is important. There's no one or less murder that is important. And you're absolutely right. It's a matter of fact that a serving Metropolitan Police officer has been charged with a murder. And without a doubt, that has sent masses of shockwaves throughout the whole police service, let alone the Metropolitan Police. But what I can say, obviously can't discuss the case and the facts, is that other officers within the Metropolitan Police have worked tirelessly to ensure that all the evidence is gleaned and that those who were responsible, or an individual responsible, has been rightly charged and has been put before the courts. And obviously that the guilt or innocence of this individual will be down to a jury who will listen to all the facts and all the evidence and make their decision on innocent or guilt.
Yes, I did make that point in my opening remarks at the beginning of the show, that those that were chanting, and they'd come with a megaphone, so to do, F the police, it seemed ungracious to say the least, because the Met found their suspect in record quick time with some really rather fine police work.
Well, let me tell you this, George. This is how a murder investigation goes, and I'm not talking about this particular one in the Metropolitan Police area, is that when the Met gets informed of a murder, there is normally a detective chief inspector in place. That officer is joined by 2 or 3 detective inspectors and 4 or 5 detective sergeants and about 30 detectives and uniformed officers, forensic teams, and by golly, the public don't know how hard and forensically they work. That's why the Met have got a very, very good reputation of arresting suspects, taking them off the streets and putting them before the courts very quickly. But in answer to your question, I've followed and I've done hundreds and hundreds of posts today defending the Met Police. I know all the facts, I know all the circumstances of what happened last night. And you're right, a few people turned up, a few women, first of all, turned up on their own. They laid their flowers, that's absolutely fine. The Met laid on 2 or 3 uniformed female officers to engage with the ladies that turned up, because that's who prominently they were, and then asked them to go home once they'd laid their flowers. Suddenly, dozens turned up, and then that became hundreds. So it was only right for health and safety issues and reasons that that officer was given, or those officers were given support. So more officers turned up, and primarily it was pretty calm. It wasn't hostile. But unfortunately, there were elements within this group that had nothing to do with this vigil, and they turned it into a demonstration. And as you rightly have highlighted, what then happened, George, is there were placards that all coppers have no fathers. F the police was shouted by dozens of them. Graffiti was of all coppers are without fathers was over a police carrier in red paint. A wing mirror was broken. Now, George, you and I know that that is not a peaceful vigil. That is a public order situation. So the police had to act. As far as the police was concerned, it was an illegal vigil, but people turned up. There was no aggression from the police, and I have seen numerous videos today where the police were being hassled and threatened and pushed and being made to feel very comfortable. And the worst I saw was a few demonstrators being pushed back, and 1 or 2, I think it was 4 in the end, were actually arrested because they obstructed the police.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of gatherings, of course, that are illegal. And they don't get broken up by the police, because the police act sensibly that the consequences of breaking up this or that crowd, say a football crowd, for example, celebrating, or in the case of one of the Glasgow clubs, demonstrating to get their manager sacked. The police don't move in on these crowds, and you can and the Black Lives Matter phenomenon that we've seen over the last year. There's a widespread perception that these kind of gatherings have not been policed in the way that this one was last night. What do you say to my contention that, given all the circumstances, the Commissioner should have given this a pretty wide berth? And if she had, these extremists would only have been shouting into the Clapham night air.
In hindsight, many people think that may well have been the case, but hindsight is a wonderful gift. As far as the police is concerned, certainly the Metropolitan Police, it was an illegal gathering, and they've been advised by government scientists that said it would be likely to spread the coronavirus. Whether you believe that or not, the whole country is in a form of lockdown at the moment. So if suddenly one large group, as worthy as the cause that it was, and it was very worthy, are allowed to have a vigil or a demonstration, then every other group in the country would use that as an example why they should go out. The police, sadly, George, are caught between a rock and a hard place. You talk about the Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, Reclaim the Streets. I must admit, the police didn't deal with all of them in a fair, equitable way. And it wasn't because they couldn't. It was because after the George Floyd killing in America, which has absolutely nothing to do with Britain, no police officer has ever been convicted of a murder in Britain. The police tried to deal with it in a softly way. What we didn't want was to heighten tensions and have all-out riots, because in my personal and professional opinion, and I've been in policing and law and order for 42 years, I can see certain groups where there's a litmus paper and they just look for the most easiest or first excuse to suddenly explode onto the streets, and that then affects businesses, households, the public fear, and puts police at very serious risk of injury or worse. That's where the Met were caught, between a rock and a hard place. And yes, they could have policed some demonstrations better, but that's what the Commissioner and her senior management team had to contend with.
Well, that's my point, though. And it is, nobody's criticising the police officers who were stuck in the middle with them on Clapham Common. I know some of these groups. I wouldn't like to be stuck in the middle of them. Believe me on that. But you say hindsight, Norman, but we're paying a lot of money to the Commissioner and the Assistant Commissioner, not to have hindsight, but to have foresight. And the Mayor has responsibilities to have foresight. And to me, it's inexplicable why some of these other demos were allowed and weren't policed in the same way. But of all the demos to police in the way that last night's was, a demo for a woman allegedly murdered by a police officer, I could have seen that coming as big as a bus, Norman.
I've got to say to you, George, that I disagree with you on that point. Last night was a softly approach. And the reason why it was a softly approach, you just highlighted the suspect that has been charged, the tensions and the concerns of women on the streets. So last night was not confrontational. In fact, it was the least confrontational demonstration, although it was highlighted as a vigil, that I've actually seen in the last 12 months. We've got a country where hundreds of thousands of children feel frustrated, dozens feel angry, and since New Year's Eve, dozens of children have gone on the streets and stabbed other children to death or committed very serious crime, and the police are trying to pick up all the pieces. We are in, or the police are in, an impossible situation. And I'm afraid that I can see very serious public disorder happening on the streets of London and other places in Britain. And unless we get a grip on it and we get the country to start working with policing rather than against them, because sadly, over COVID, there has been a massive gulf, I'm afraid we've got dire times ahead. And over the last 30 years since I've been campaigning about gun crime, knife crime, violent crime, antisocial behaviour, you name it, I've highlighted it and I've told you when it's likely to happen. And if you look at all my record, George, I've been spot on nearly every single subject. I'm telling you now that unless we get a grip of law and order in London and Britain, we have got dire public order times ahead. Crime will go further through the roof. The police can't and won't cope. At the moment, we're dealing with serious crime and everyday crime with 22,000 less officers that we've lost over the last 10 years. The government are now giving us back, like a burglar, 20,000 of those officers. You've got the mayor calling for Cressida Dick to give her an account of last night's events. She's happy to do that. Ed Davey, the head of the Liberal Democrats, looks at 2 or 3 convenient videos, and unlike a court where you hear 2 sides of the story, he wants Cressida Dick to resign. She shouldn't resign. She should stand up for her officers, which he has done. And I'll be quite honest with you, George, I've done about 300 or 400 posts a day on social media defending the police and tackling and challenging all of those that seem to be clueless but are out for blood, including much of the British media who have given a one-sided narrative to last night's events.
So would you say, because I'd be surprised if you did, would you say that Cressida Dick is the best that the Blue can produce? Because I think she's been a disastrous commissioner.
So, I'm not saying that she's the best, but she is the commissioner at the moment. I don't know any better at the moment that could replace her in the Met. She's got a senior management team, but the thing is, she is in post, and the commissioner is in charge of the Metropolitan Police, and she is the one that we should support. If she feels the need to step down for any reason, and I certainly can't see any from last night's issues and today's issues. I don't know if you know, George, but outside Downing Street at the moment, you've got hundreds of demonstrators shouting out similar obscenities outside number 10 Downing Street. And can I just bring us back to what this is all about, George? And I know we're short for time. A young 33-year-old girl, 33 years of age, Sarah Everard, was dreadfully murdered. There's never a nice murder. And suddenly her death has been hijacked by some militant groups, and there are hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of others that are highlighting concerns about harassment, being sexually assaulted and raped, which is a very valued concern. But throughout the whole of yesterday and today, the death of Sarah seems to be forgotten. She seems to have been the catalyst for people to use their own agenda to be angry and cause mayhem. And as I say again, the police are caught between a rock and a hard place. Yep, let them carry on and do what they wanted last night. But the militant people amongst them, George, if they then went into Clapham High Street and started putting in all the windows and robbing people in the street and committing mayhem, guess who they would blame? The Metropolitan Police Commissioner and the Met Police for not policing an event that they were aware for. So they can't win if they allow the vigil or if they cancel the vigil. And I don't know if you know too much about policing, George. We've spoken before. Policing is a very difficult job. You have to police by consent, but you don't police by command and demand. You police in the best possible way you can. And sometimes we put operations together and occasionally they go wrong. We review them and make sure that next time we do our best to make sure it goes better. And I'm sure that's exactly what the Commissioner would do tomorrow, because the Mayor has asked her of that. Well, there's much there, but as you rightly say, we're out of time. There's much there that we could debate, but I'll agree with you that Cressida Dick is the best Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police that we have got, because that's all I would agree with you on about her. But Norman, I'm always grateful for your wisdom, right from the front line over all those decades. You're a star. Thanks, Norman Brennan, for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Much obliged. Who is to blame for the rise in violence against women? You think A, the government, 31%, B, the police, 16%, C, men, 53%. Me, I think it's all three. If I was drawing up that poll and there was room for it, that's what I would have said. But the Telegram poll is 44% the government, 15% the police, and 41% men. Much more to come over the next 2 hours, because this is the mother of all talk shows. But now it's time for the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
London's Metropolitan Police Force is facing fierce criticism for its handling of a vigil in memory of the murdered woman Sarah Everard, with Commissioner Dame Cressida Dick being urged to resign. Scuffles broke out at the gathering on Clapham Common last night as officers told attendees to go home. Policemen were seen violently grabbing hold of several women and leading them away in handcuffs. In the early hours of this morning, Scotland Yard confirmed that 4 people were arrested for public order offences and breaching the coronavirus restrictions at the South London vigil. Home Secretary Priti Patel described footage circulating of the police actions as upsetting and confirmed she had demanded a full report on what had happened. London Mayor Sadiq Khan added that he was in contact with Dick and was urgently seeking an explanation. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said the scenes were deeply disturbing. He also said that it was not the way to police the protest. However, the Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey went further, writing a strongly worded letter to the Commissioner. In it he said this was a complete abject tactical and moral failure on the part of the police, asking Cressida Dick to, quote, consider her leadership of the service. Organisers of the Reclaim These Streets campaign, which had opted to cancel its event, said women across the country are deeply saddened and angered by the scenes of police officers physically manhandling women at a vigil against male violence. The British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has appeared in court in Iran a week after her ankle tag was removed, having served 5 years in prison. She was ordered to appear on charges of propaganda against the regime. The judge told her to expect a verdict within 7 working days, according to the Free Nazanin campaign. Her husband, Richard, said the British Embassy in Tehran had declined to accompany his wife to Sunday's trial. Zaghari-Ratcliffe was jailed in 2016 for allegedly working against the Iranian government, which she has always denied. According to her lawyer, she was accused in Sunday's hearing of participating in a demonstration outside the Iranian embassy in London 12 years ago and giving an interview to the BBC Persian service. Ireland has temporarily halted its use of the Oxford AstraZeneca jab after some reports of blood clots in vaccinated people. The move came after a review from the Norwegian Medicines Agency, which showed 4 new cases of serious blood clotting in adults, which had occurred after the jab. Ireland's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr Ronan Glynn, recommended the COVID vaccine be temporarily deferred from this morning as a precaution, although he added that a conclusive link between the vaccine and these cases had not been established. The leader of a group of Myanmar politicians ousted by a military coup has vowed to press on with a revolution against the authorities. In his first public address, Man Win Kiang Than said it is the darkest moment of the nation. From hiding, he leads a group of legislators who have refused to accept last month's coup. Protests continued today, with at least 5 people killed. US President Joe Biden's administration says it's been trying to contact the North Korean government since February, but has yet to receive a response. Washington had tried to reach Pyongyang in several different ways to prevent tensions escalating, officials said. The US and North Korea remain at loggerheads over North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The former undisputed middleweight boxing world champion Marvelous Marvin Hagler has died at the age of 66. The American dominated the middleweight divisions from 1979 until his controversial defeat by Sugar Ray Leonard in April 1987. His wife Kay Hagler said, "Today, unfortunately, my beloved husband Marvelous Marvin passed away unexpectedly at his home here in New Hampshire." Hagler fought 67 times during his 14-year professional career, winning 62 of them, with 52 knockouts, drawing twice and losing 3 times. His most famous one was in April 1985 when he fought Thomas Hitman Hearns over 3 brutal rounds, a classic known as The War. Hagler made 12 successful title defences until his defeat by Leonard by split decision, and he retired a year later. The cryptocurrency Bitcoin has risen for the first time above $60,000 by continuing its record-breaking run. Bitcoin, which has more than tripled in value since the end of last year, has been powered on by well-known companies like Elon Musk's Tesla, publicly buying large amounts of the digital asset and promising payments via the cryptocurrency in the future. Bitcoin's total market value last month exceeded $1 trillion. However, it does have a track record of wild price swings and has fallen sharply a number of times since it was created in 2009. French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo has again prompted outrage after releasing a cartoon depicting the UK's Queen Elizabeth kneeling on the neck of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, invoking the death of George Floyd. The cover image cartoon came days after Meghan and her husband Harry made a series of damning accusations against the royal family in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, including that the skin tone of the couple's child, Archie, was discussed as a potential issue before he was born. The cartoon published yesterday is titled "Why Meghan Quit Buckingham," with Meghan drawn to say, "Because I couldn't breathe anymore." In January 2015, after publishing cartoons offensive to Muslims, gunmen broke into the magazine's office in Paris and shot dead 12 people, wounding 11 others. And finally, a small rural town in Norway is an unlikely place to set a world record for a tall building. But soaring above Brumunddal, a town of 10,000 people more than 100 kilometres north of Oslo, is the 280-foot tall Mjøtstårnet Tower, which became the world's tallest timber building when it opened last year. Not so much skyscraper as a ply scraper. The 18-storey structure contains apartments, office space and the aptly named Wood Hotel, and besides putting the town on the world map, it has added to the growing body of evidence that timber can provide a sustainable alternative to concrete and steel. The record-breaking feat was achieved thanks to a type of engineered wood called cross-laminated timber. It's produced by gluing strips of laminated wood together at 90-degree angles to one another before they're compressed into huge beams or panels under extreme pressure. Advocates for CLT claim that compared to existing options, these towers are quicker to construct, stronger and perhaps most surprisingly safer in the event of a fire. The construction and operation of buildings accounts for 40% of the world's energy consumption and approximately 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. Ho Vienna, a mixed-use development just 5 feet short of the Mjøtstårnet, has just opened for business in Austria. Vancouver in Canada is already home to 174-foot tall wooden student residence, and in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, work on a 238-foot wooden apartment block, Ascent, is set to begin in June. And British firm PLP Architecture also has plans for 3 wooden skyscrapers, including a 984-foot tall tower in the heart of London. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Some of the responses, of course, to the events of the last few days in relation to the cruel and vicious murder of Sarah Everard have been, quite frankly, bonkers. The Green peeress, the only lady in the House of Lords for the Green Party, actually called for a curfew on all men after 8 o'clock in the evening. Now, if I had said in the wake of the London Bridge stabbings that we should curfew all Muslims at 8 o'clock in the evening, I would quite rightly have quickly been under arrest. But the collective punishment of all men for the crime of one man was a surprisingly enticing liberal nostrum for all kinds of people. A member of the front bench of the Scottish National Party, a front bencher of the SNP, she went one further. She said we should consider a 6 p.m. curfew for men where the murder of a woman has taken place, which is effectively all over the place, and misses the point that the most atrocious serial murderers of women have done so all over the country, travelled all over the country in order to do it. Misses the point that a man bent on murder is unlikely to be all that fussed about obeying a curfew. And who would police the curfew? And who would drive the ambulances in at least half the cases? Who would work in the hospitals? Not to mention every other business open after 6 o'clock. The Scottish economy is in such atrocious nick at the minute. This SNP frontbencher just declared a potential death knell on the entire Scottish economy and the collective punishment of precisely half of all the Scottish population. She has not been asked to resign, she has not been sacked, and neither has the bonkers Green peeress. But more importantly, when did it become acceptable to punish an entire class of people for a crime committed by one of that class of people? Just think about that. Now, to call my next guest, Chris Yume, a VFX and AI artist, is like calling George Best a footballer. Chris is the master of VFX and AI deep fakes. So much so that he's the man in front blowing the whistle on the very real dangerous possibilities that these deep fakes have. And to do so, he actually produced a video of Tom Cruise that was so chillingly realistic, I'm surprised that Cruise himself didn't break out in a cold sweat about it. Chris Yume is a man with a vast following on social media for a reason. The man is a modern-day genius, and he joins us now. Chris, can I just beg actually, that you never do a deep fake of me? Because I'm not sure I could survive the kind of thing I saw in the Tom Cruise video. We'll look at it later, but seriously, in all seriousness, this AI that many people were already nervous about has great potential upsides, but this is one of the potential downsides, isn't it?
Yes. Hello, George. I'm really happy that I had the chance to raise awareness and entertain people at the same time. I see it as my form of art, combining different techniques to create new things no one ever thought about doing. And I'm really glad people enjoy my Tom Cruise videos. They're so silly and so stupid, but so funny at the same time. And yeah.
How does it work? How do you do it? I know magicians never give away their tricks, but can you, in layman's terms or laywoman's terms, tell us how it works?
Yes. I instruct the machine learning tools to start learning Tom's face, to learn all of his expressions, to learn all of his face angles, how his nose looks, his freckle. I teach the machine, I tell the machine to learn all of these things. And then after that, I have my colleague, Miles Fisher, who's the actor of these videos. He's doing all the acting. And then the machine learning tools are going to reconstruct all of Miles' expressions, but then by using Tom's face. And that's how I can change Miles' face to that of Tom, if I describe that correctly.
Yeah, well, maybe this is a good time to look at it. It's your video, and we have your permission to use it.
Yes.
So let's have a quick look at it, Chris. Are you ready to do that, Chris? Here
Go
we
for
go.
it.
Just watch this, I tell you.
In this reel, you're going to see my amigo, Chris Umi. He's going to introduce to you the wonderful world of deepfakes, how AI and VFX are unlocking the future of our imaginations. What's up, TikTok? You guys cool if I play some sports?
I think there's bubblegum inside this. That's incredible. How come nobody ever told me there's bubblegum? Incredible.
Now, first of all, tell us, how long did it take you to make that video?
Well, the base model I used to train Tom on, I trained 2 months on that model, and then every video needed 2 or 3 days to train on that video separately. And when it was trained with AI, it took me on average 24 hours on average doing post-production, going frame by frame, fixing issues. So everything looked correct and everything looked right. So it took me a while to do this. It's not easy.
No, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And so it isn't easy. Any feedback from Tom about it?
Well, no. We sent his management a mail. If we asked them if they didn't feel good about it, we would have deleted the account. That's what we told them. But they haven't responded, and they made a TikTok account themselves, a verified one, Tom Cruise. So they did see it. They They just didn't respond.
Well, yeah, no comment is a comment. Tom did nothing discreditable in that video and said nothing discreditable. But you can see, I speak as a sometime politician, Chris, you could see the potential dangers of this. You could, I don't know, you could fake Donald Trump threatening to grab women by their private parts and other unlikely things like that. You could have Bill Clinton not having sex with that woman. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, but you see my point. This could be used for very negative purposes, couldn't it?
Well, yeah, that's where all technologies, especially new ones, it could be used, it could be misused in very bad ways, and it could have a lot of consequences. But even if I'm not doing it, the technology is still going to evolve. I'm very much in favor of regulation for AI and deepfake in general. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a jurist, I'm an artist, and but if I could raise awareness doing what I do, then I'm happy, and I hope a lot of people realize now that this technology is coming. You cannot stop it, and it's like Photoshop 20 years ago. People didn't know you could fake photos. Nowadays, everyone knows a photo can be faked, but still, you need an expert to create a really good fake photo. So it's not easy, but it's coming, and I would love to help work on detection tools and how we can avoid this kind of stuff. But we have to prepare ourselves.
How fast is the AI technology in this field developing? I mean, now you can Photoshop. You can get an app to Photoshop. Is that where we're heading with this? It will be commercially marketed?
Eventually it will. We're not there yet. It still needs a lot of time to get there, because for this you needed a lot of expertise and a lot of time to work on this, and especially also my hardware. I have the best of the best, and I have one of the best Tom Cruise actors in the world, like Miles Fisher. He's been doing Tom Cruise impersonation for years. He's got the perfect body language, the mannerism, the way Tom Cruise smiles. Like he's got all of these things. It's perfect. So we shouldn't it's 1 + 1. He's an expert at what he's doing, and I'm an expert at what I'm doing, and that's how we create these videos. So it's not easy to do what we did, but we have to realize stuff like mouth manipulation. Like, let's say we have a speech of Trump and someone wants to edit what he's saying. Like, we have to prepare for that. It's going to happen, and we have to find ways how to detect it and how. Yeah.
Well, of course, one consequence might be that people stop believing anything. Exactly. If you come up with me misspeaking on this show, I simply say I've been faked.
I have a really good example of that, if I can talk about it.
Yes, go on.
I have a woman who sent me a LinkedIn message, and she sent me some videos a few days ago, and then there was some case like the police find her daughter for being at a party, and the police had proof there were videos, and she said they're fake, they're deep faked, and I said I'll take a look at it. So and she had this document of 56 pages, all with all things she saw in the video, and it was fake because this wasn't her daughter, but it was really up close, and it was so, these angles were so difficult, it was impossible to deep fake. So I went frame by frame, and I read what she was saying, and I just sent her an email back, like, I did an analysis, like, it's impossible to fake this. This is real. Your daughter was at that party. You should face it. Like, it's not fake. And then still she sent me a mail like, no, I know where this is going. Deep fake is everywhere. Like, this video is fake. This is a deep fake. So this what I want to say is, like, people believe what they want to believe. I couldn't change her mind. That was crazy.
Chris, I've been catching up on your work, which is truly phenomenal. What's the best way for people to keep up with your work and see the wondrous things that you do?
Yeah, you can follow me on my Instagram, VFXChrisHume, or on my YouTube, and I create a lot of things. I don't only do deep Tom Cruise. I use techniques to create art, and I hope people like my stuff. I try to entertain people. That's the most important thing.
It's terrific stuff, and I encourage everyone to look at it, just as long as you promise never to deep fake me. Thank you, Chris Hume. Very, very nice to see you. A fascinating subject. Thanks for coming on the mother of all talk shows. Let's take a quick break.
Radio Sputnik.
Our world is full of mysteries. The lost city of Atlantis. Area 51. Who killed JFK? The clock on Dr. Ranjeet Brar's wall.
It's a conspiracy, man. We have a right to know.
Shut it, you nutter. The senseless made sensible. Only on the mother of all talk shows.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Okay, we're taking your calls. If you're in the UK, 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or tweet us at George Galloway, at RTUK News. Who is to blame for the rise in violence against women? Well over 2,000 of you have voted. The government, 31%, the police, 16%, and men, 53%. Now, this is where I take you back in our history to the events that shaped our present. This is the week. On this day in 1991, the so-called Birmingham Six walked free from jail after their convictions for the murder of 21 people in 2 pubs were quashed by the Court of Appeal. Paddy Joe Hill, Hugh Callaghan, Richard McElkenny, Jerry Hunter, Billy Power and Johnny Walker, who between them served 96 years for a crime they did not commit, were released onto the streets outside the Old Bailey in London. The 6 were arrested in 1974. They had left Birmingham shortly before bombs exploded in 2 city centre pubs in the bloodiest ever IRA atrocity. The Mulberry Bush pub and the tavern were both destroyed in the blasts. 21 people were murdered, more than 160 injured. The men claimed in their trial that they had confessed only after being beaten by police. Still on this day in 1964, Jack Ruby was sentenced to death after being found guilty of the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged murderer of President John F. Kennedy. In an appeal to the Texas Supreme Court, Ruby's lawyers argued that he could not have received a fair trial in Dallas due to the excessive publicity, as if it wasn't quite a lot of publicity everywhere. The court agreed and ruled that his motion for a change of venue before the original trial should have been granted, and so Ruby's conviction and death sentence was overturned. Well, these things happen. While awaiting a new trial, Ruby died, surprisingly, of a pulmonary embolism in hospital on 3rd January 1967. Well, these things happen too. And in 2013, Xi Jinping was named as the new president of the People's Republic of China. The Observer journalist, we talked about this last week, Farzad Bazoft, was executed in this week in 1990 in Baghdad. Bazoft was convicted by the Iraqis of spying just 4 days before. He was hanged at dawn after a last-minute appeal for clemency from the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, failed. And it was this week in 1972 that the film The Godfather premiered in New York. It was directed by Francis Ford Coppola and starred Marlon Brando and Al Pacino. It was quite possibly the greatest film ever made, apart from its sequel, Godfather 2. As for Godfather 3, well, I think that's an ugly rumour. It never actually happened. Former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro was kidnapped in Rome in this week in 1978. His escort of 5 police bodyguards were killed when he was snatched at gunpoint from a car near a cafe in the morning rush hour. The government refused all pleas from family, from friends, even from the Pope, to concede to any demands. 8 weeks after he was kidnapped, Moro's body was found riddled with bullets in the boot of a car in Via Catani in central Rome. The Red Brigades claimed responsibility for the murder. Harold Wilson, Labour leader for 13 years and Prime Minister for 8 years, surprisingly announced his resignation in this week in 1976. He was 60. Now, I knew Harold Wilson. I knew him when he was the Labour leader. I knew him better after he had been the Labour leader. He had a rather gloomy mansion flat behind Westminster Cathedral, where I often went to worship, and I met him in the street with no police officers, just me and Harold bumping into each other in Victoria Street. He invited me, he remembered me, and he invited me to come to his house for tea, which came as a bit of a surprise to his good wife, Mary. And thereafter, I attended many, many times to Harold Wilson's apartment in Victoria, dozens of times. He was in absolute control of his faculties, as long as he was talking about matters from, in some cases, decades before. He was not as in control of his faculties when talking about something that happened 5 minutes earlier. So he would frequently invite me to have a scone with my tea, and Mary would gently remind him that I had already eaten my scones and that there were none left. But he was absolutely fascinating on subjects which have not yet fully been in the public domain, principally about the efforts made by the intelligence services next door to destroy his premiership and destroy his leadership of the Labour Party. And one of these days, I'll tell you all about it. Now, thousands of people were killed and many others were injured in a poison gas attack on the Kurdish city of Halabja in northern Iraq in this week in 1988. Up to 20 aircraft, said to include Iraqi MiGs and Mirages, were seen overhead at around 11 local time. It was in the last days of the war between Iran and Iraq. Figures for the final total of dead ranged from 3,000 to 5,000. Between 7,000 and 10,000 are believed to have been injured, wounded in the massacre, which became known as Bloody Friday. At the time, both the United States and British government insisted that it was Iran that had launched this chemical weapons attack on the people of Halabja. But that was because Britain and the United States were on Saddam Hussein's side in the war between Iraq and Iran. Funny that, isn't it? I, on the other hand, always said it was the Iraqis what did it. And in the demonstration that was called in Glasgow to protest it, I was the only Member of Parliament that turned up to protest it. Go figure. Now, more than 200 people were arrested after thousands of demonstrators clashed in an anti-Vietnam War protest outside the United States Embassy in Grosvenor Square in London in 1968. And I was there at my first ever demonstration, age 14. The trouble followed a big rally in Trafalgar Square where an estimated 10,000 people demonstrated against American action in Vietnam and British support, albeit limited, for the United States war. The violence broke out when the protesters marched to the US Embassy in Grosvenor Square, which was heavily guarded. White South Africans in 1992 overwhelmingly backed a mandate for political reforms to end apartheid and create a power-sharing, multiracial government. In a landslide victory for change, the government swept the polls in all 4 provinces. It won 68.6% of the vote in a record turnout. The following year, talks led to the creation of an interim constitution, and in 1994, South Africa's first non-racial elections were won by the African National Congress, of which I was a partisan, and Nelson Mandela became president. In this week, a group of Argentines landed on South Georgia, one of the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic, in 1982 and planted their nation's flag. About 50 Argentines arrived at the island, about 1,400 miles east of Argentina. Many did not expect Britain to retaliate, but on the 5th of April, a British task force set sail, and in the end, 655 Argentines died, along with 255 British servicemen in the ensuing war when the islands were recaptured. And finally, and it's one we certainly would love to forget, but won't, it's now exactly a year on from the first lockdown in the pandemic. That's it, an historic 7 days. That was the week. That was. My goodness, the calls are backing up. Can I take Simon in Kings Langley, please? Simon.
George, hello. I've spoken to you once before.
Welcome, you're welcome back.
Unfortunately, you agreed with me. George, I've only just realised you were on this platform. What I wanted, I've been waiting to hear you your opinion on. Look, I agree with almost everything you say. Specifically, that U.S. Senate hearing, I thought that was significant. But because you were right, and I also think I agree with a lot of what Piers Morgan says, and I know that you often see the same side of things with him. I'm so interested to know what you think of this interview and what you think of Piers Morgan's situation, because I think the whole thing's absolutely barking mad, as was that interview. But
I have somewhat controversially spoken about it on Twitter. So you can always, if you're on Twitter, you can check what I have said. But in short, Piers Morgan is a friend of mine. I don't let other people pick my friends. And he's been a friend of mine ever since he was the only Fleet Street newspaper editor, to oppose the war on Iraq.
I've done security work from him in the past. He wouldn't remember me, but I agree with him. A lot of what he says, and almost everything you say. A lot of people think that perhaps you don't say it the right way, but I think you call things what they are and as they are, and I think people should do that.
Well, whether he's right or whether he's wrong, I happen to think he's right, and it seems you do too. That is hardly the point. Have we really reached the stage in cancel culture where the most successful presenter of the most successful morning television show gets sacked for saying something that some people don't like? That is Piers Morgan. That's why his show is so successful, because he stands up for what he believes in. Now, many of the things he believes in, I don't believe in. But I believe in his right to believe in them and his right to speak to his belief in them. Go on.
Absolutely right. But the trouble is, opinions now are something that they're a privilege, aren't they? And if you have an opinion that is, I mean, Cressida Dick thinks she's not going to lose her job. I mean, she absolutely had the twist after last night. But she should do. But this is my opinion. I'm entitled to it, and you're entitled to yours.
Yeah, I have the same opinion. Norman Brennan, our police guest earlier, didn't share that opinion. Isn't that what media is supposed to be?
No, but they're all in the same box, aren't they? They're all in the same bubble, you know. And when a politician, if you like, says, or the Prime Minister says their job is safe and we stand by her, that gives you...
That's the prelude to the sack, yes. As I agreed with Norman, it's true that Cressida Dick is the best commissioner we've got, but definitely not the best commissioner we could have. Simon, thanks for the call. Michael is in Minneapolis. He's got an update on the George Floyd story. Michael, welcome back.
Thanks for having me on, George. How are you doing today?
All good. Nice to hear your voice. Go on.
All right. Well, Officer Derek Chauvin's trial began this past Monday here in Minneapolis at the Hennepin County District Court downtown, very near to where I live. He is currently facing charges for second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. There was some controversy as the judge initially rejected the third-degree murder charge and wanted to just do second-degree murder or second-degrry manslaughter, but he was overruled. Judge Cahill was overruled, and so now they're considering third-degree murder. That's interesting because it's a lower bar to try to.
It's a lower bar, but is it also a lower crime and therefore a lower tariff?
It's actually a very similar. They're both 10 to 15-year sentences. So it's third-degree murder, or third-degree murder was most often used in the United States to prosecute, say, drug dealers who give out drugs that end up killing people, right?
Okay.
So they're not intending. So they aren't necessarily, the idea is they're not, intending to kill someone, but they show wanton disregard for human life. And it's also Mohammed Noor, who was the officer, who was the first Minneapolis police officer ever to be convicted for murder for anything on duty, was convicted of third-degree murder for his, he killed Minneapolis resident but Australian citizen Justine Ruszczyk Damon a couple years back. So I think they're using that as a legal precedent. I will say, George, it's a really, there have been protests. They've been largely during the day, and they've been peaceful. The media here has been very, there's been a decent amount of media around the trial. But I will say it feels, I've never seen, the Hennepin County Court, the district court is normally where I go to pay, if I have a parking ticket or something, right? And I park on the road and I walk up and I walk in. Well, there's none of that now. I mean, they put up heavy concrete barricades. There is multiple levels of fencing everywhere. There's barbed razor wire, and they've got National Guard troops in full flak jackets holding assault rifles, surrounding.
Who are they scared of? The supporters of Chauvin or the Black Lives Matter people?
I mean, George, I can't answer that except to say I'm not sure why they'd be scared of anyone in particular. And I think it just kind of speaks to the increasing police state nature of the United States. We feel like we're occupied by our own government. As you know, Washington, D.C. is a very similar.
I was going to say that's exactly the site that would greet you if you went to, as a tourist, go and look at the Capitol or the Lincoln Monument. You'd be looking through razor wire.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and it's. I mean, I'm profoundly sad and pretty disturbed about it because it feels more and more like it reminds me. I mean, they have military vehicles, George, down in downtown Minneapolis. I haven't seen anything like this since I lived in Guatemala. With just armed guards and things everywhere, and even that wasn't even necessarily close to what I see here. So, I think it's profoundly sad that way. They've seated 7 jurors thus far. The prosecution has dismissed 5 potential jurors, and I think the defense has dismissed 8 at this point. But most notably, in the last couple of days, the biggest new news is that the city of Minneapolis, in the civil suit over the George Floyd murder, agreed to a $27 million settlement with George Floyd's family, which is the largest in the history of the Minneapolis Police Department.
Well, that's a lot of money. Now, on the face of it, Michael, I don't think there are any legal restrictions in the U.S. To you answering this question, but you might know better. On the face of it, there doesn't seem much to try in the court. We have all seen Chauvin with his knee on the throat of George Floyd, and we know how long he kept it there, even though the man was claiming, as it turned out entirely accurately, that he could no longer breathe because of it.
I'm mystified, George. I mean, all the evidence, it's a 9-minute video of him, it's essentially an execution in slow motion. Yeah. And we all saw the video. And when I was out this week, I happened to get into a conversation with a police officer, and I asked him what he thought and if he thought, Chauvin was guilty. And he told me, well, neither of us have seen all the evidence. I said, there's a 9-minute video of him kneeling on his neck till he died. What else do you need to see? And he didn't have an answer for me on that. So, wow. I mean, it seems clear as day to me, but, in the United States, I mean, we've seen, over the years, officers go free on what look like clearly murders, George Zimmerman with Trayvon Martin in Minneapolis just a few years ago when Philando Castile was killed by Officer Geronimo Yanez, where he basically walked up to the car and within 2 seconds pulled his gun out and started unloading a clip into a car that had not just Philando Castile, but also his girlfriend and her 4-year-old 4 or 5-year-old daughter in the backseat. So I mean, it seems clear as day to me.
Yeah.
But I think to speak to what you said earlier, George, my fear is that the reason why they're fortifying the courthouse is because they think, well, maybe they can get Chauvin off. And if he's not convicted, I can tell you, there won't just be protests, there will be riots. If somehow after seeing that video and everything that's built over this past, 9 months or so, if he gets away without a conviction, I mean, this city is gonna burn. I mean, I truly believe that. So I certainly hope they're able to attain a conviction at least at the third-degree murder level, hopefully a second-degree murder level, because I think that's entirely justified in this case. And, and a lot more has come out in the last few weeks about, a lot of former police officers have kind of thrown Chauvin under the bus and said that, he's kind of gone wrong and turned into a bad dude, and they've gone on the record saying that. So,
Michael, keep us posted with the trial as it goes, will you, please?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, George.
Appreciate it. Now, I've got so much social media. It's not fair to everyone that wrote in that I don't do any of it. And I thought this one was apposite. Nick says, Norman Brennan, the police guest we had on earlier, says that no police officer has ever been convicted of murder in Britain. Funny that. Why? Actually, fullfact.org says the last time a police officer was successfully prosecuted in the UK concerning the death of someone in custody was in 1969, more than half a century ago. I think I have to take a break. I'm being told so. Give me 60 seconds, will you?
Radio Sputnik.
Call me. Come and have a go. If you think you're hard enough, don't bring up a false name. Come on air. Call me and let's have this matter out.
Let's get ready to rumble!
How have you got the nerve to tell people to Brexit if you're not telling them the repercussions?
That's 2016's argument, Michael. I'm no longer arguing with you about the merits of Brexit. I'm arguing with you about democracy, about the right of the majority to have their decision, their vote implemented.
This match will get red hot.
Not have a referendum. Let them have a referendum. Let them sort it out amongst themselves.
I want a referendum. Robert, I want a referendum. Let me put that in capital letters. If you think this year, which is shaping up already to be an annus miserabilis for the SNP, if you think this is your year, go ahead. Come on. Let's have it out.
It's on. But no, George, it's not as simple as that, right? Have you seen the documentary about Cambridge Analytica and people who work there? Have you looked at the
I know nothing about them. I'm not interested in them.
Precisely. But
I'm not interested in them, Bruce, because it's all a red herring. Just like Russiagate was a red herring.
You're up.
Do you only want to hear voices that agree with you? Because if you do, you're not clever enough to be at this open university of the airwaves. In fact, you need to go back to remedial and learn something about what democracy and freedom of speech actually mean.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Yeah, another interesting dichotomy on the poll, which finishes in 7 minutes. If you still want to vote, you can do so in the next 7 minutes. On Twitter, 31% blame the government for the rise in violence against women, 16% blame the police, and 53% blame men. And 2,591 votes were cast on Twitter. But on the Telegram poll, 48% blame the government, as opposed to 31%. 14% blame the police, that's 2% less than on Twitter. But only 38% on the Telegram poll blame men. So whilst Twitter believes men are mainly to blame, on the Telegram poll, the government is mainly to blame, according to the respondents. Let's take some calls. They're backing up. Ian is in Hounslow. Let's hear from him. Ian, welcome back.
Good evening, George. First of all, excellent critique of the Clapham Common fiasco on your introduction.
Thank you.
Spot on. Now, the UK is unsafe for women, because I don't know if you've noticed the return of the sexual objectification of girls and women in the media. Advertising, cinema, magazines, reality shows. It's just gone, we've gone back after all the progress that was made.
That is interesting. I haven't actually noticed it. I'd be a liar if I said I did, but I'll take your word for that. I don't have eyes for any girls anymore, being blissfully, happily married. But are you saying that we've kind of gone back to the page 3 type era?
Sadly, yes. Add to the mix the divisive identity politics of rabid middle-class graduate feminist radicals that's driven a wedge between men and women. The biggest ally for women is men. To stop this.
That's an interesting proposition. I don't disagree with it. But it's important to stress, Ian, that the vast majority, in fact, I think it's over 80% of violence against women comes from men that the women know and comes in overwhelmingly in a domestic context. And the lockdown will not have made those figures any better.
Sadly, yes. But at another point, because of our failure to check our borders, we've let over 60 serial rapists into the United Kingdom from Eastern Europe who've been convicted again of serious sexual assault against women after they arrived.
Yeah, it's an absolute scandal, and every time one sees a case like that, one's blood runs cold. An Albanian rapist was told he could stay in Britain because his life would be in danger if deported back to Albania. These cases are horrific, but the vast majority of rapes, assaults, murders are committed by homegrown murderers, rapists and assailants. We've got enough of our own here.
Yes, enough of our own.
Good point, I agree. Let's hear from Michael in Sydney, down under. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, hi, George.
Hi.
Thanks for warming up my morning. It's quite cold here in Sydney. But look, I was just ringing because your poll there. Now, I think there should be all of the above. Because
you're only allowed 3 options. That's the problem.
Right, okay, because most politicians, most police, and all men are men, and basically government policies. I agree. Yes, lockdown hasn't helped, and the promotion of alcohol hasn't helped. I also agree that with some of the things you said about the previous caller said about the media. Totally agree with that as well. And there is an objectification of women, but at the same time, men should be able to keep their hands to themselves. There's no excuse to say she was dressed provocatively or whatever, so I did this or that.
No, of course.
There's like men should be able to keep their hands to themselves. And also on identity politics, I mean, you're talking about that, and basically, I totally agree. Like here in Australia, I have mental health issues myself, and basically, I don't ever use them as an excuse why I did something. And at the end of the day, we got 2 politicians here in Australia currently hiding from the media due to rape allegations against
Oh, that's right. I did pick up on that. Can you succinctly, briefly tell us who's accused of what?
Well, we had the head of the department, I think it was Defence, a lady alleged she was raped. And I'll say alleged because it's not proven yet. And we do live in a system where innocence is until proven guilty. And she basically put herself on sick leave with mental health issues. Never had them before, but currently she's so stressed out she can't come back to work. And there was another guy, Christian Porter, who's the Attorney General, who basically had been exonerated by the police because the lady who accused him killed himself. And they're currently saying, if we have an independent investigation, what should we do? And he's the Attorney General and he won't step aside. And they're refusing to hand it over to the Solicitor General. So, I mean, like, it's a bit of conflict of interest there that you are the Attorney General and you can directly influence the police.
We are familiar with such conflicts of interest. In Scotland, it turns out that the man with the duty of maintaining discipline in the separatist SNP party at Westminster, the chief whip is called, turns out to be the subject of multiple complaints from teenage boys that he had sexually assaulted them, and that this was covered up for 3 years, and he was regularly reappointed as the chief whip, despite these complaints, which were never dealt with properly, that he was sexually assaulting people. So he was actually policing allegations of sexual assault against others, whilst himself being accused of sexual assault. You couldn't make it up, Michael.
Yeah. No, basically that's the situation here in Australia. We've got an Attorney General who basically writes the law of the land and is, for all intents and purposes, the head judge, I assume. I think that's the role they play. And he's refusing to hand over to Solicitor General. And, so, I mean, basically, how can...
And is this having its impact on the elected political sphere? Or is this all being fought out amongst, as it were, civil servants, officials?
Oh, basically, politicians on both sides are guilty of the same thing at several times. So I don't think really, the Labor Party's picking up on it, of course. But, you can't trust them as far as you can throw them. So, I mean, basically, you're stuck here and you're the same as you are in England and everywhere else with basically a duopoly of power that no one will ever challenge.
Well, that's right, Michael. Thanks for that call. The truth is that power corrupts, and all power corrupts absolutely. In the case of Scotland, the young teenage boy who alleged that the chief whip, the man in charge of discipline for the SNP in Parliament, had multiply sexually assaulted him. But the same teenage boy claims that he was sexually harassed, not assaulted, but sexually harassed by a woman SNP MP. So while the vast majority of these beasts that prey on women and try to force themselves on women are men, at least in the SNP, one of them is allegedly a woman MP. There's a new poll going up. I don't know about these polls. I don't draw them up. And here it is. It's going live now on my Twitter feed. Who asked Meghan what colour the baby would be? And for American viewers and listeners, we spell colour the proper way, C-O-L-O-U-R. Who asked Meghan what colour the baby would be? A, Prince Andrew, B, Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, or C, Camilla, the morganatic wife of the aforementioned Prince Charles, the heir to the throne. By which I mean, for the less educated, she will not be the queen when Charles becomes the king. And were there to be any issue from their marriage, that issue would not be royal. Hey, I'm an expert on these things. Now, Rachel says, I've never met a woman that wasn't sexually harried or worse by a cop. I've met lots and lots of women who were never sexually harassed by a cop. And Mick says, police will do whatever they're told to do from the top. Sandy says, don't turn on Dick. She will stand firm. And James says, note the way in which the mainstream media and Labour leadership have reacted to the unacceptable arrests on the grounds of COVID restrictions at yesterday's vigil, and the acceptable arrests on the same ground at last year's Free Assange protests, spun as anti-lockdown protests. This is the point I was trying to make to Norman earlier. The absolute double standard that has been applied to Black Lives Matters, to football gatherings, to the Assange case outside the High Court, where only a handful of people were involved, but were bundled off. In one case, we interviewed him, a man of, I think, 90 years old. I stick to my view. Norman didn't buy it, but I stick to it. Any sane commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in these circumstances would have the police a mile away from the protests. Obviously, if they'd set off for Clapham High Street to smash in windows and riot, then the police would have had to act. But as long as they were there on the grass, in the dark, in the middle of Clapham Common, what was the point of acting in a way towards them that you did not act towards others? My view, you may have another one, in which case, especially if you're a woman, I need your call in the final hour. Let's take the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
London's Metropolitan Police Force is facing fierce criticism for its handling of a vigil in memory of the murdered woman Sarah Everard, with Commissioner Dame Cressida Dick being urged to resign. Scuffles broke out at the gathering on Clapham Common last night as officers told attendees to go home. Policemen were seen violently grabbing hold of several women and leading them away in handcuffs. In the early hours of this morning, Scotland Yard confirmed that 4 people were arrested for public order offences and breaching the coronavirus restrictions at the South London vigil. Home Secretary Priti Patel described footage circulating of the police actions as upsetting and confirmed she had demanded a full report on what had happened. London Mayor Sadiq Khan added that he was in contact with Dick and was urgently seeking an explanation. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said the scenes were deeply disturbing. He also said that it was not the way to police the protest. However, the Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey went further, writing a strongly worded letter to the Commissioner. In it, he said this was a complete abject, tactical and moral failure on the part of the police, asking Cressida Dick to, quote, consider her leadership of the service. Organisers of the Reclaim These Streets campaign, which had opted to cancel its event, said women across the country are deeply saddened and angered by the scenes of police officers physically manhandling women at a vigil against male violence. The British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe has appeared in court in Iran a week after her ankle tag was removed, having served 5 years in prison. She was ordered to appear on charges of propaganda against the regime. The judge told her to expect a verdict within 7 working days, according to the Free Nazanin campaign. Her husband, Richard, said the British Embassy in Tehran had declined to accompany his wife to Sunday's trial. Zaghari Ratcliffe was jailed in 2016 for allegedly working against the Iranian government, which she has always denied. According to her lawyer, she was accused in Sunday's hearing of participating in a demonstration outside the Iranian embassy in London 12 years ago and giving an interview to the BBC Persian service. Ireland has temporarily halted its use of the Oxford AstraZeneca jab after some reports of blood clots in vaccinated people. The move came after a review from the Norwegian Medicines Agency, which showed 4 new cases of serious blood clotting in adults, which had occurred after the jab. Ireland's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr Ronan Glynn, recommended the COVID vaccine be temporarily deferred from this morning as a precaution, although he added that a conclusive link between the vaccine and these cases had not been established. The leader of a group of Myanmar politicians ousted by a military coup has vowed to press on with a revolution against the authorities. In his first public address, Man Win Kiang Than said it is the darkest moment of the nation. From hiding, he leads a group of legislators who have refused to accept last month's coup. Protests continued today, with at least 5 people killed. US President Joe Biden's administration says it's been trying to contact the North Korean government since February, but has yet to receive a response. Washington had tried to reach Pyongyang in several different ways to prevent tensions escalating, officials said. The US and North Korea remain at loggerheads over North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The former undisputed middleweight boxing world champion Marvelous Marvin Hagler has died at the age of 66. The American dominated the middleweight divisions from 1979 until his controversial defeat by Sugar Ray Leonard in April 1987. His wife Kay Hagler said, "Today, unfortunately, my beloved husband Marvelous Marvin passed away unexpectedly at his home here in New Hampshire." Hagler fought 67 times during his 14-year professional career, winning 62 of them, with 52 knockouts, drawing twice and losing 3 times. His most famous one was in April 1985 when he fought Thomas Hitman Hearns over 3 brutal rounds, a classic known as The War. Hagler made 12 successful title defences until his defeat by Leonard by split decision, and he retired a year later. The cryptocurrency Bitcoin has risen for the first time above $60,000 by continuing its record-breaking run. Bitcoin, which has more than tripled in value since the end of last year, has been powered on by well-known companies like Elon Musk's Tesla, publicly buying large amounts of the digital asset and promising payments via the cryptocurrency in the future. Bitcoin's total market value last month exceeded $1 trillion. However, it does have a track record of wild price swings and has fallen sharply a number of times since it was created in 2009. French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo has again prompted outrage after releasing a cartoon depicting the UK's Queen Elizabeth kneeling on the neck of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, invoking the death of George Floyd. The cover image cartoon came days after Meghan and her husband Harry made a series of damning accusations against the royal family in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, including that the skin tone of the couple's child, Archie, was discussed as a potential issue before he was born. The cartoon published yesterday is titled "Why Meghan Quit Buckingham," with Meghan drawn to say, "Because I couldn't breathe anymore." In January 2015, after publishing cartoons offensive to Muslims, gunmen broke into the magazine's office in Paris and shot dead 12 people, wounding 11 others. And finally, a small rural town in Norway is an unlikely place to set a world record for a tall building. But soaring above Brumunddal, a town of 10,000 people more than 100 kilometres north of Oslo, is the 280-foot tall Mjøtstårnet Tower, which became the world's tallest timber building when it opened last year. Not so much skyscraper as a ply-scraper. The 18-storey structure contains apartments, office space and the aptly named Wood Hotel, and besides putting the town on the world map, it has added to the growing body of evidence that timber can provide a sustainable alternative to concrete and steel. The record-breaking feat was achieved thanks to a type of engineered wood called cross-laminated timber. It's produced by gluing strips of laminated wood together at 90-degree angles to one another before they're compressed into huge beams or panels under extreme pressure. Advocates for CLT claim that compared to existing options, these towers are quicker to construct, stronger and perhaps most surprisingly safer in the event of a fire. The construction and operation of buildings accounts for 40% of the world's energy consumption and approximately 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. Ho Vienna, a mixed-use development just 5 feet short of the Mjøtstårnet, has just opened for business in Austria. Vancouver in Canada is already home to 174-foot tall wooden student residence, and in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, work on a 238-foot wooden apartment block, Ascent, is set to begin in June. And British firm PLP Architecture also has plans for 3 wooden skyscrapers, including a 984-foot tall tower in the heart of London. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, the doctor will see you shortly. Dr. Ranjeet Brar, our Moats medic. So if you've got medical calls, COVID calls, get them in now. 02077 982 255 if you're in the UK. And if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Or tweet us at George Galloway at RTUK News. Now, Here is the poll that they have come up with. Who asked Meghan what colour the baby would be? Well, my first point is nobody claims that anybody asked Meghan. What is claimed is that they asked Prince Harry. And there's some doubt as to when, because Meghan claimed it was when she was pregnant. But Harry said it was before the wedding, which automatically casts a fair bit of doubt over the whole story in my mind. Moreover, I'm going out on a limb for you. I'm saying that I bet my wife's Indonesian relatives asked questions about what our children would be like. The answer is, of course, absolutely gorgeous, as mixed-race children almost always are. Now, were they, if they did, I don't know that they did, and I'll probably get in trouble when I get home, but if they did, were they being racist, or were they being merely curious? So I'm not sure that this allegation even has the force that people have vested in it. There's some doubt as to when, if at all, it was said, but there's no harm in speculating. Bit of fun. Who asked Meghan what colour the baby would be? And here are the numbers so far. Prince Charles, 44%. Camilla, 28%. Prince Andrew, I'd probably go for him, 28%. And this poll is going through the roof. So we'll finish it in an hour, or a little less than an hour. So if you have a point of view on that, let me know on my Twitter, @George Galloway. Now, I hope that Dr. Ranjeet can join us now. Dr. Ranjeet, as always, deeply grateful for your time. There will be, I'm sure, calls for you, but if I can get a couple of questions in first. What can you tell us about the extent to which the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine seems to be running into, at the very least, public relations troubles everywhere, but maybe some suspicion or suggestion, at least, that it's not quite the vaccine that Pfizer is? As someone that got the Pfizer, I'm kind of glad now, maybe irrationally, that I didn't get the AstraZeneca. What can you tell us on that?
George, good to be with you. Yeah, there have been a number of concerns about the AstraZeneca throughout its development. Initially in Brazil, there was a case of transverse myelitis, some spinal cord problem, a neurological disorder that was feared to be associated. And I don't know if you'll remember that the trial was put on hold for a period of time, but that was found not to be related. And inevitably, when you roll out any medicine, you're constantly looking for its side effects. When the vaccine first went into mass use in Britain, on the very first day, there were at least 2 cases of allergic reaction associated with the virus, and then that was really highlighted as something to be really concerned about. You'll remember that for a long time there's been advice, if you suffer from severe allergic reactions from anaphylaxis, then you probably should avoid taking the AstraZeneca vaccine. In fact, the number of allergic reactions has found to be very small in the many millions of doses that have now been given out, and there's a quite rigorous follow-up in Britain from the MHRA, from the Medicines Healthcare Regulatory Association, which is monitoring very carefully the side effects. But in Norway, in Denmark, and I think in Ireland as well, use of the vaccine has been temporarily suspended. There was initially reported a number of blood clotting problems. It does seem that several, probably 3 or 4 patients in Denmark seem to have had a blood disorder following administration, which not been widely publicized apart from in the media, but essentially it seems to be disseminated intravascular coagulation. So a problem with blood clotting, which can also cause bleeding. That can itself be related to an anaphylaxis type picture. So we'll have to see. The jury's out, but most places in the world are still giving it. We've not seen that to my knowledge, and I have been studying the safety data as it's been rolled out in Britain. And so far, it's not a proven connection, but a question mark was raised, a sufficiently serious question mark, that in Denmark and Norway in particular, and I believe now also in Ireland, they have temporarily suspended administration of the vaccine pending the outcome of their investigation, George.
But compared to the millions of doses that have been administered, whilst these problems are serious enough if you are the person that got them, they do represent statistically a very, very small risk, don't they?
They're a very small risk, George, but of course, it's a risk benefit that will be significant considering the number of people that's having it, and of course there remains a significant proportion of the population whose risk from the virus itself is very low. We know that's not the overall population risk. We know there are particular at-risk groups, but there will be people who, on the basis of this, will feel uncomfortable about taking the vaccine. I think they're probably wrong overall, but you can understand that people who suffer or have essentially a very low risk based on their population and health status from the virus itself. People who've had the virus, people who are extremely young, people who are essentially fit, may feel unwilling to have the vaccine, and that should remain within their realm of choice to do so. And I am concerned that, with increasing talk about vaccine passports and increasing numbers of things, not only travel, but perhaps even domestic things, which will be limited by vaccine passports, that will be an element of coercion. Overall, my feeling is this is a safe and effective vaccine. I would emphasize that. However, every time there's one of these safety signals, it will make millions of people who've had that vaccine or likely to have that vaccine worried, and it just causes us to reassess the balance of risks associated with any particular vaccine. And George,
is this this issue that you raise about the different vulnerabilities in age groups and health characteristics and so on, is this likely at some point very soon to lead to a ceiling, basically, on the number of vaccinations that we are doing here in Britain? In other words, are we reaching the point that everyone that wants it will soon actually have been offered it, at least?
I think there definitely are different opinions amongst different sections of the population. Initially, there was quite a degree of skepticism, even amongst medics. Actually, increasingly, it's become clear to me as more and more of my colleagues and friends have either had coronavirus or realized how serious a disease it can be for so many of our patients. They've overwhelmingly taken up the vaccination when offered. But that's, I think, you'll find 90 to 95% in the medical profession. And similarly, we're rolling out the vaccine to the most vulnerable and the most elderly first. And vaccine uptake amongst those group who rightly perceive themselves to be a great deal of risk has been extremely high, again, over 90%, perhaps probably 95%. But, I feel, perhaps I have a skewed perspective because, having spoken about this so much with you, I receive a lot of information via social media from various friends and associates who have still a high degree of vaccine skepticism. And that, I think, is based fundamentally on their skepticism towards our ruling political elite and the way they've handled this pandemic, which I think is justified. It's their skepticism to a degree, of the business community, and the fact that they put profit above health, and there's a conflict of interest there. But I think, overall, the population still are showing themselves to be wanting to be protected from coronavirus. And I think it's unquestionably the case that with the fall in cases, that the vaccination program is helping us to move away from lockdown, away from restriction measures, and back in towards a normal society. Though obviously, we've commented many times before, the problems that we're left with from an economic crisis, increasing poverty, and all the social ills that we're facing certainly not going away anytime soon, George.
Some, I say some, actually lots. We'll not be able to deal with them all, Doctor, but let's take some calls. Kamran is in London. Go ahead, Kamran.
Oh, hello, George. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Welcome.
And many thanks for all your valuable work. It's been absolutely fantastic following your sort of show. And thank you, Dr. Brar, for hearing me out. I just wanted to run a theory by you, and it's something that I haven't heard mentioned very often. So I just wanted to see whether you thought there was any connection to, historically, we've had diseases like salmonella, mad cow's disease, bird flu, swine flu, foot and mouth, and a pattern emerges. It seems to be potentially even COVID now, animal related. So we're clearly doing something wrong with the way we are looking after animals, livestock, factory farming, the rest of it, and that's impacting, the health of everyone. And now globally,
very interesting question, Kamran. Thanks, Doctor. How would you respond?
Some truth in that.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you. Is everyone else hearing you? I've lost Dr. Ranjeet at this stage, so I'm going to read some more comments. Matt says women's rape cases hardly ever get a conviction. That is to blame. And Sean says George Dominic Cummings broke all the restrictions and wasn't touched. And Tommy says, Khan, Dick and Patel, we all know are not fit for purpose. Only you, George, will say so in public. Too many people are too scared to admit that you are right. And Peter says the education system is not teachers' responsibility. However, because there's a huge female imbalance, they have emasculated boys, and it is producing an opposite effect. I appreciate it's only one reason in a complicated scenario, but it should be discussed. That's from Peter. And Ollie says, I don't believe you can assign blame to any one sector. Society in general needs to look at itself, how we use social media and the hate that is available to read here every day, how accusations without facts can be used to meet a narrative. Logic and reason are no longer used. And Roscoe says, I think the press have to take a lot of blame, as their bias and downright lies have increased levels of tension in everyone, not just in men, but the whole population. Plus their seeming unwillingness in Scotland to say anything negative towards or about the SNP is shocking. And Dave says, it's a societal problem, unfortunately. Girls and women are sexualized throughout the media. It's changing, but far too slowly. Education, better male role models, and harsher sentencing. Jack says football hooligans get a police escort. Women with flowers assaulted by the police. Where's the sense? And Eleanor says it's men. You can't blame the government or an establishment. It's men with sick minds. And Philip says men not challenging inappropriate behaviour, because 30 years ago it would have been a fight, but these days you'd get stabbed. And Mark says none of the above. Psychopaths are responsible for killing women. People who attack and kill women are not men. And Jack says it was a copper who'd already gotten a pass for indecent exposure, allegedly. Sounds like we know who to blame, George. And Haley says it's never been safer in history. Now every incident gets much more focus, what with technology, etc., which brings us all closer, but at the same time magnifies all incidents. Kamran, if you are still on the line, we're having difficulty connecting with Dr. Ranjeet, but if you'll hang up now, I promise you I remember your call, and if we do get Dr. Ranjeet back, we'll ask him. It may just have to be on the phone. Should I take Salesh in Leicester? Yes, Salesh.
Hello there.
Your call.
I wanted to ask about ME and chronic fatigue syndrome. About the vaccine. Is it suitable for people with that condition?
Which condition, Salish? I missed the first few words.
ME or chronic fatigue syndrome.
Okay, yeah, good question. I have heard that raised before. When the doctor... Is Ranjeet on the line now? On line
I am,
one?
George. I'm sorry, I only have you on audio. I'm very sorry.
That's fine, that's fine, doctor. We all know how wonderful you look. Let's deal with Kamran's first point, which is that all of these seem to be coming from animals. Does that point up a problem in how we're handling livestock and so on?
I think to an extent it does. I mean, we discussed that some time ago at the beginning of the pandemic in a book that's well worth reading called Guns, Germs and Steels by Jared Diamond. So there's a question as to how civilization itself evolved through towns, through more dense human population, through closer contact with animal husbandry, chickens, pigs, goats, sheep, cows in particular, as being the main sources of human food as humanity exploded in terms of its population numbers. And in fact, it was that gave the European populations a great deal of immunity to lots of germs and diseases which they had encountered through close contact with both their own effluent and animal effluent in large numbers, in large volumes, living in essentially a town situation. And that meant that European settlers in the Americas, for example, who had immunities to smallpox, and when they introduced smallpox into the Americas, had devastating effects on the Native American population. Some of that was deliberate, some of that was accidental, but there was a difference in immunity which was due essentially to living in towns and living in close proximity to animals and animal husbandry. So there unquestionably has historically been a link. And in terms of poor food processing, with the salmonella in particular, there is an ongoing link. Whether this particular virus entered, as was initially, some of the more lurid propaganda because of Chinese eating habits, has not been proven. So exactly how viruses transfer between animal vectors and man is not always known. You'll remember the bubonic plague, of course, was famously transferred by a flea vector and carried in rats. So there is a relationship between many diseases and our animal environment. Some of that is due to our food handling, but by no means all of it. Some of it is just the nature of the dense populations in which humanity now lives, George.
Excellent question, excellent answer. Thanks, Kamran. Salesh asked if it was safe for people with ME to take the vaccine.
So I think we had myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome. I have not seen very clear data to say that it is made worse by the virus. But, this is a condition which is notoriously difficult to get a hold on. Even a definition or a diagnosis is a diagnosis of exclusion. It's a broad group of symptoms, which is fatigue, sometimes depression, can be brought on itself by viral illness, can be brought on by stressful situations in work or in your personal life. And it's something that's been, I think it probably is characterized by a range of different disorders. It's an overlapping syndromic condition, and it is notoriously sensitive to any new stress and strain. So it's not impossible that something like a vaccination of this kind or any other kind, an illness, getting a cold, having a stressful week or weekend or a life event, all these things can have a feeling depressed for a time. So all these things can have an impact upon that condition. So it would be very hard to pinpoint that it was this vaccine per se. And certainly, given the risk that an elderly population who tend to suffer from that condition might have, I wouldn't advise against taking the vaccine.
I mean, the fear of catching the virus would be enough to stress out people that had this condition in any case. But no reason not to take it is what you're saying in essence there.
I would think so.
Dr. Ranjeet, I'm always grateful to you, but for you coming back on the phone when we lost you on the picture, I'm especially grateful. Thank you very much indeed. See you next week,
Thanks, George.
God willing. Who asked Meghan what colour the baby would be? Prince Charles, 43. Camilla, 29. Prince Andrew, 28. 1,401 of you have voted already. You've got half an hour. Don't forget my Telegram channel, t.me//George Galloway. And don't forget my shop. Is my shop detail able to go up on the screen? Because we've got a lot of really good special offers on with books and DVDs and so on. Now, breaking news. We have had a response from French national television regarding last week's dispute. And I have no idea what that response is, but none of us will learn until after this break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Hello, people of Britain. Your Prime Minister here. Not only am I helping British people get its fish back, but I'm helping these fine gents get their fish supper. Isn't that right, my wet seafaring friends?
About bloody time they showed up north and did some tell.
Yes, quite. Mushy peas, battered cod, quintessential British pub grub. Even hoping to see some sexy mermaids. Just don't tell Carrie.
Incoming! Chuff it out!
Crikey! What's that in the distance? Pirates?
Where, son? The French. Wake up and smelt garlic, boys. It's time to do some fighting.
Oh, look, another ship.
Ah, Boris, didn't they know they've been fighting buggers off since 1972? It's time to get our waters back, Cocker.
Yes, quite well. I've come prepared. No, they're not time for Thatcher. I'm ready to defend British waters.
Where's the hand in the pocket? Turn that bloody music off and take that bloody hat off. Come on, get the finger out.
I'm channeling my inner Horatio Nelson. Battle of Trafalgar. Down with the French ships and all that great British history. Man the cannons!
I put that bloody champagne down, you rate tough. Do some bloody work, for Christ's sake.
I hereby christen this vessel HMS Victory!
Quick, somebody throw him overboard!
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, I have no idea what I'm about to be told. Young James Giles, who stood in for me, you remember, once at a couple of hours' notice, and who incidentally will be co-presenting with my good wife Gayatri Sputnik from a week on Saturday. So this coming Saturday is my last Sputnik because of the electoral period, which is governed by Ofcom, and therefore I cannot be on the Ofcom regulated Sputnik, but I will still be on every week on the mother of all talk shows because this is in a totally different legal situation. Although good taste will be observed. I don't know whether to look at you, to read your face. What have French TV said?
Well, look, it's quite difficult to read my face because I've got the mask on and obviously we're adhering to social distancing. But France TV, France 2, have now come back after a week since we submitted the dispute and said that they are withdrawing their claim. They accept that it wasn't theirs, that it was in fact yours. Of course it was. It was a live interview going out on air. How could they possibly have owned it? But on screen now, you'll see Compliment d'Enquête accepted our dispute claim just half an hour ago, and Facebook has said that you will receive your share of the ad earnings from that. There's been no apology still from France TV, nor any explanation from Facebook as to why the entire show was removed from your page, which severely affected the audience numbers last week.
It devastated them, yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, we would normally have had a reach of about 150,000 people
at least
on Facebook,
at least.
maybe more. And this was devastated by a bogus claim from France 2.
Absolutely.
So if that's the sum total of the response, it doesn't satisfy me.
Certainly not.
And I'm sure it doesn't satisfy any of us involved in this. It does move the focus slightly towards Facebook, which didn't just interrupt our show, it took the entire show off.
Absolutely.
And kept it off. You now cannot see last week's show on Facebook.
No, you can't. Absolutely.
Because of a bogus French claim that they owned the interview. So, if you are watching, and I assume you now are, France 2, now that we've got your attention, we note that you have withdrawn your claim and your claim on earnings from Facebook ads. We don't accept the failure to apologize, and in any case, we await your proposals for remedy. You have severely damaged our financial, commercial, artistic, and political output, and you'll have to pay for it. So if you're watching, I'd get your lawyer on the line if I were you, because I'm quite a difficult man to deal with, as you will find, unless you make a suitable offer. James, thanks for that. Good luck with Gayatri presenting the Sputnik in future weeks.
It'll be a pleasure.
For 4 or 5 or how many weeks is it?
6.
6 weeks. A 6-week season with James Giles and Mrs. Galloway. It must be pay-per-view. Appointment to view anyway. Viewing. Let's take some calls. Richard is in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, George. Thanks again for taking my call.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
I'm listening and I've been looking intently at what is going to happen in the Scottish nationalist election. And I call it that because everybody's thinking that they're going to win. But at the end of the day, George, you have a woman here who is now a dictator in her own right up there now. She won't take no for an answer on anything. She's sacked a few people, and she's done a despicable act by trying to get Salmon put in prison for life, which, I mean, she mustn't have been very well advised on things like that, because she must have known at the end of the day she wouldn't win, but she just kept battling on, and it's cost this country millions of pounds to get anywhere near,
well, the SNP have cost the country hundreds of millions of pounds. I should say, of course, that she would deny any role in trying to have Alex Salmond put into prison, but she could not deny the loss of hundreds of millions of pounds. Let me give you the shorthand of it. We have already paid £25 million in compensation and cost to a Rangers football club administrator who was, to quote the Lord Advocate, the chief law officer in Scotland, maliciously prosecuted by his office. Maliciously prosecuted. And one of those administrators has been paid £25 million. And there are 7 of them. So 6 other cases coming down the pipeline. If they all cost us 25 million, you can do the maths. We also lent 7 million pounds to a smelter owner and haven't even asked him for the money back, and he's now not in a position to give the money back. And worse, we have guaranteed his business, which is in danger now of going bust, to the tune of more than £500 million. £500 million. In a country like Scotland with 5 million of a population, in which only half the people pay tax in any case, we are in serious trouble, Richard, which is why I'm going to say to you, you are the last man who thinks the SNP are going to win these elections. Nobody in Scotland now thinks the SNP are going to win these elections. The only question now is who's going to jail. Richard, thanks for the call. Gordon is in Dundee. Go ahead, Gordon.
Evening, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thanks for ringing.
George, just a couple of points, really. As you highlight on your show quite a lot, the government in Scotland seems to be stuck in this never-ending circle talking about another referendum for independence.
The never-endum, I call it, Gordon.
The never-endum, yes. So what I say is, this doesn't seem like it's going to go away until we have another referendum. So why don't we have one, but this time have a clause that after the result is decided, that there can't be another referendum for, an actual generation, let's say 30 years. And my second point, which is related to the first point, is why did the UK government not have the foresight to put a clause like this in the first referendum? Because surely they could have seen that if it was a no vote, which it was, that this was never going to go away.
Well, a very fine couple of questions there, Gordon. I'm grateful to you for them. The short answer to the second one is because David Cameron is an idiot. David Cameron did not put such a clause in the Edinburgh Agreement, did not deal with the issue of the huge numbers of Scottish people, including the captain of the Scottish football team, who almost always lives in either Liverpool or Manchester, are denied a vote in a referendum which could end in them becoming stateless. Didn't even allow Scottish soldiers serving in Catterick, never mind abroad, to have a vote in a referendum that could have decided to render them foreign mercenaries in the British Army. Didn't allow British soldiers to vote who were Scottish, didn't allow Scottish people in England, hundreds of thousands of them, the right to vote when it could have rendered them stateless. David Cameron gave them the date that they wanted, the 700th anniversary of the Battle of Bannockburn, which that great Scottish patriot Mel Gibson had already told us was somehow something we should have a side in, although it was a battle fought between two French-speaking kings with Scottish people on both sides of that battle. And above all, he gave them the question that they wanted, making them the yes crowd, and miserable old curmudgeons like me having to say no. Well, none of that can ever be allowed to happen again. We need a Clarity Act which lays out the quite exceptional circumstances and hurdles that would have to be crossed if another referendum was to be allowed and if the result of it were to lead to the breakup of the country. Germany doesn't wake up every day wondering if its country is going to be broken up. Neither does France or Italy or any major country in the world. It doesn't have to justify its existence every day. But I disagree with you on giving them another referendum now. For this reason. First of all, we're in a pandemic. Second, only 20% of Scots want a referendum this year. Only another 15% want a referendum in the next 5 years, and so on. So there's no demand from the people for that referendum. But the most important reason is this: moral hazard. There is a moral hazard involved in allowing people to refuse to accept the results of referendums. We had that with the Brexit referendum, where we had unending chaos because the losing side refused to accept that we had voted to leave the European Union. And you cannot, for fear of moral hazard, Allow the losers in a poll to continually be given another chance to have their way. Last word to you, Gordon. Go ahead.
Well said, George. And I think it was a huge mistake not to have a clause in the first one. But I really feel like we can't move forward in this country with the real issues until this is dealt with, because, you know, everything seems to be geared around the independence referendum number 2.
I said last word to you, but forgive me a brief word. We do have an opportunity to end the never-endum. We do have an opportunity to get off the hamster wheel, and that comes on May the 6th. If we vote the SNP out, there will not be another referendum for a generation, which you're right, is 30 years. Gordon, thanks for the call. Albert is from Kinlochranach. How could I refuse a call from Kinlochranach? Go ahead, Albert.
Thanks very much, George. Glad to be on the show.
Thanks.
If I could take the opportunity, first of all, George, just to thank Dr. Brar for his lovely work. It's awesome to hear him every week, giving us the lowdown on what's actually happening.
Thank you, very kind. I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Brad. This SNP hate crime bill just went through the Parliament. Now, I've been voting SNP for a year, and I just like to say this ends my allegiance with them. You, like me, George, we come from the home of hospitality. And the one thing that we do up here, this is how we roll. If you're out of touch and you're speaking out of turn, you're no longer getting pelt up here. And we keep ourselves connected. Now, the trouble I have with the hate crime bill is this, George. If a person has a view that's a bit off, and he keeps it to himself, it festers. Whereas if a fellow has another point of view, like if I said something to you right now, George, that you probably, oh, but you're wrong about that, you would keep me right. There would be something to think about, and I would correct my view. Now, this stifles any conversation whatsoever.
Even in your own house. Even in your own house, Albert.
Exactly, George. I think it's outrageous. Now, when I think, I'm 51, I think back to sitting on my granddad's knee and him telling me about the war and how he fought Nazis to give us the freedom of living. And here's what we can and can't think. No, I'm not saying anything about people who've got gender problems or race issues.
I know you're not, because you're a gentleman. But
thank you, sir.
But if you wanted to, why shouldn't you be allowed to?
Exactly
to your own
right.
family in your own living room.
Bloody right, mate, you're correct. And that's what the trouble is. That what they've done by silencing this, George, is if you've got a festering point of view that isn't aired, how can I possibly correct my fellow countryman and say, whoa, you're way off the mark there, and give him something to think about so he goes away and has a rethink to himself about how wrong he is about his point of view. Now, I think that they're going down a dangerous, slippery path
It's
here.
very dangerous. And I'm really glad that you, as a former now SNP supporter, can see that. And I would draw this conclusion from it, Albert. These people, and this is not the only example I could cite, but for the hour, these people cannot be trusted with state power. We now know what they would do with it. If Alex Salmond had been on trial in an independent Scotland ruled by Nicola Sturgeon, he probably wouldn't be here now in order to tell the tale.
I hear you there, George. You're dead right. And on the matter, just a wee point of view on the Royal. So when I saw that video effects guy, I was, oh my God, imagine Harry and Meghan are actually in the tower, and that was just a video effect.
Well, exactly. I mean, I'm preparing my alibi for some unfortunate videos I've been in, some unfortunate interviews I've given, some unfortunate speeches I've made. It was all a deep fake, Albert.
Well, you totally, I get it. Listen, George, thanks for having fun.
No, it's been a pleasure. I'm much obliged to you for the call. Federico is in Canada. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Federico.
Hi, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you, George.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I was just thinking about the fact that you have been isolated by Facebook and all that stuff, which is happening to me too. I only have 52 subscribers in my YouTube channel for the last 5 years. I only have 75 videos for the last 5 years. So I'm not surprised that when you talk something that is against the rules and regulations of YouTube or Facebook, which support sometimes outrageous policies, whether foreign or national in the United States, and foreign policy towards the rest of the countries. Well, if I have only 52 subscribers and I'm being just this morning called by YouTube and said that my last video on UFOs has been deleted because I use a video that has property rights or intellectual property rights, I'm not surprised that you, George, are having with so much audience.
Thanks for the sympathy there. But I want to stress that we did not use any video. It was a live interview between me and another former British parliamentarian about the British royal family on a Russian television station. The last thing in the world it could have been was the property of a French TV station. And merely withdrawing it does not get them off the hook in any way. And they better not imagine that it does. Federico, thanks for that call from Canada. Now, Cam says in response to the Meghan poll, well, I thought it was Philip, but they've said no. And Alan said none of them. I'm totally ambivalent towards the royal family. Like all celebrities, I couldn't care less. Still, I doubt very much anyone would be that crass. And Alice says, does anyone really care? I don't believe it was said in a bad way, but more out of curiosity, in a family way. I know several families who've had the same discussions about hair colour and skin colour without a single malicious or racist thought, just curiosity. And Joan says, couldn't he, she, they just have confronted or challenged the person, discussion, at the time? Wouldn't that be the adult and more honest thing to have done? Well, if Harry was a man at all, that is exactly what he would have done. But there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol.
Hello, George.
Hi. Lovely to hear from you. Yes.
Oh, good.
The whole world's listening.
Oh, listen, on that was the week, you didn't include that it was the 7th anniversary of Tony Benn's death.
That's because I'm going to make my closing remarks about that very point.
Well, the thing I wanted to say was, there was, on Twitter, I think it was John Pritchard, he put a picture of the speech that Tony Benn made on the Parliament on Iraq.
Very beautiful, yeah.
Apart from what an orator he was, and I don't suppose all the listeners that are listening would know, but you would, George, there were pictures of Tam Dalyell, Alice Mann and Jeremy Corbyn. Now, they were sitting by him. Now, I did like Alice Mann. I think she was the MP for Halifax.
She was wonderful, very good friend of mine.
I remember.
She gave up far too early, actually. She retired far too young.
Yeah, she did. And I remember, if I remember correctly, when I did see that at the time, that she was the only woman MP that spoke out at that particular debate on the war in Iraq.
Yep.
And, you know, I think she's very undervalued. I had great admiration.
Not by me. I loved her dearly. And she opposed not just the war on Iraq, but the war on Yugoslavia. She opposed the war against Afghanistan. She argued powerfully, cogently, that all of these wars would achieve the opposite of what the intent that was claimed to be. And Alice Mann and dear Tam Dalyell, also no longer with us, along with Mr. Ben. It was quite heartbreaking for me to watch that video, because what it showed, Norma, was what we've lost. The scale of parliamentarian that we have lost. None of today's parliamentarians could make ex cathedra, without notes, the kind of speeches that Mr. Benn made regularly, routinely in Parliament. There's a picture of me with him at the time outside the BBC. Tony Benn was like a father to me for many decades. I first met him in 1974, and I last saw him in a coffin at his funeral.
Yeah. He was my MP for a while, you know.
He was a very fine MP for Bristol for many decades, and then, of course, he had to fight in the courts, Norma, to be allowed to be your MP.
I know. I remember all of that. I mean, it shows how old I am, doesn't it, really? But
well, you and me both.
It's very interesting.
He had to fight. The system insisted that he become a lord. He become a viscount, a hereditary peer. And he said, no, I want to sit in the people's house. I want to be elected by the people. And it was a great shock, actually, when he lost, after decades, his seat in Bristol. But, of course, he came back. The best champions always come back.
Yeah, he came back.
And he came back in Chesterfield, and some of his finest moments were in his old age as the MP for Chesterfield. He was a giant, Norma. He was a giant.
Oh, I know. Do you know, I get so disillusioned nowadays. But listen, is Alice Mann, has she died now?
I don't think she has died.
Oh, don't you?
But
I think she has.
I might be corrected. I hope I'm not. Norma, one last call to go. So if you'll forgive me, I'll say goodnight to you and take a call from Mike in East Lothian. Go ahead, Mike.
Evening, George. How you doing?
By the grace of God, I'm good, sir. Thanks for calling.
Right, I've got a problem. I'm getting quite worried now. Okay?
Tell me.
I was following the Alliance for Unity tactical voting programme, as in, you know, I think I posted it on Facebook. You might have seen it. You probably don't know who I am.
I don't actually see Facebook, no. I'm on Twitter, but other people do my Facebook work.
I think it was a Twitter feed, but anyway, I'm a minnow, okay? But I think I posted on my Twitter feed that I'm a long-time Conservative voter, and I still am to heart.
Yeah.
But for this round only, based on your kind of recommendations, which I kind of agreed with in the background anyway, I would tactically vote for Labour, and I would give Alliance for Unity my second vote.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that was fine. But the Conservatives seem to have ramped up their give me your second vote campaign.
Yeah, well, they would do. They would do, Mike. Of course.
It's worrying me a little bit.
I'm only cutting you short, so I've got time to give you an answer because the show's about to close. So forgive me for that. It's quite simple. If a party wins one seat in a region, the value of its second votes, its regional list votes, falls by half. If it wins a second seat, in this case in South Scotland, its value falls again by a third. And so if it wins a third seat in that region, its value falls by 4 and therefore quartered. So if you imagine, as I do, that the Conservatives will win at least 3, but maybe 4 constituencies in the South Scotland region, then a vote on the second vote for them becomes effectively worth less. You would need 4 times the number of Conservative votes to get 1 member in on the list than you would need to get me in on the list. I'm the alternative, Mike. I'm the number 1 candidate on our list in South Scotland. So you'd need to get 4 times the number of Tory voters to elect a member of the list than you would to elect me. So I'm your safe option. I think you already know I'm pretty good at this. The SNP certainly know. That's why they hate me so very, very much. I'll look you up on Twitter, Mike, and see if I can further satisfy you. But that's it for the show this evening, except this. Women between the ages of 15 and 44 are now at a higher risk of rape and domestic violence than of cancer, car accidents, malaria, or being injured in war. That's a pretty damning statistic, and one on which we should all cogitate. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, I hope to see you all again next week at the same time. Same place.